How many times was Joseph Smith in jail? How many times were him and his buddies in jail? We have stories of coercion and predatory control. When you have predators as your leaders, you have to make them righteous. You develop an entire culture that justifies abuse and harm. And that's what we have today. And the historian Barbara Jones Brown is talking about how the Mormons turn their guns and shoot these immigrants at point blank range. And one of the boys goes, "Cool." And I was just like, buddy, no, no. And that's what happens when you have a bunch of frontier men who start what, I'm going to just be blunt, is kind of a frontier sex cult. And they're predatory and they're scamming people and they're using the government. And you know, now we've lost all the LDS listeners. They're like, we can't trust what she says. And so Joseph Smith had that. I do believe that that was sincere. I believe at some point he probably had to make a choice in his brain. How much of this is my bullshit and how much of this is happening? And I don't know if he lied to himself or he made a conscious choice to lie to others. But at some point, his integrity, if it existed, was absolutely co-opted by his greed and his ambition and his shadow sides, right?
Welcome, everybody. This is the Jaden Jeffs Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Lindsay Hansen Park, who is the famous Mormon historian who basically knows everything about Joseph Smith more than anybody else. She was a consultant on Under the Banner of Heaven and American Primeval. Is that right?
That's right.
She grew up Mormon, correct?
Yeah, LDS.
LDS. Can I say Mormon or do I have to say LDS?
Well, now if we follow my current prophet, you have to say LDS, but Mormon. I'm
okay.
Good with Mormon.
All right. But yeah, Lindsay, thanks for being here. And I'm just excited to talk to you about my dad and Joseph Smith. And today is Father's Day too.
Yeah, did we do that on purpose?
No.
Wow, that's
I know,
weird.
isn't it?
That's spooky.
I know. I left religion, and spooky things like that are still happening.
Same man. Same.
It's like there's some kind of spiritual reality that just catches up to you sometimes. What
a way to celebrate Father's Day.
I know. What am I supposed to even think about Father's Day?
That is a long question for your therapist for many, many years.
If I had one, I would ask him. Well, this idea that I talk to a lot of Mormons, and they love Joseph Smith, right? They worship him. Wait, you're not still Mormon, are you?
No, I claim the heritage. So when I say I'm Mormon, it's, to me, I don't think it's something that washes off. Like 7 generations, both sides, like it's where I come from. So I claim the heritage, even though I'm not really proud of the legacy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like that's what happened.
Yeah, it's just like it's who I am. It formed who I am. And so, you know, I don't expect everyone who grew up in this culture to feel the same. But for me, it's like, you know, it's part of who I am. I'm not embarrassed about that. It's obviously a huge part of my work. So, but I certainly don't believe in the institutional claims. I carry some of the like metaphysical, like sometimes I'll pray still, even though like Heavenly Father and I have a problem, you know, but every once in a while that old stuff just comes up. So I go with it when it's useful, and when it's not, garbage. So
okay.
I went through a huge atheist phase when I left the church, and, you know, and then had some experiences that sort of brought me back to belief.
So you're kind of coming back around to being a Mormon, like they knew you would.
I'm coming back. I'm silencing my phone. I'm sorry. I keep getting calls.
Yeah, you're a famous historian, so you probably get all kinds of calls.
Well, I wouldn't say I know everything about Joseph Smith. There are historians that know far more, but I'll do my best today.
Yeah, but you're the most popular historian. Why is that?
Because I can translate academic, scholarly stuff to a general audience. And I feel like that's my gift, right? Is being able to sort of synthesize all the information into a story that makes sense. My mom was a public historian, is what they call it. She would dress as a pioneer and go to like libraries and schools and teach the stories of Mormon pioneers. And so I grew up sort of with that cadence of storytelling, talking about the history, but telling it to fifth graders, right? And so sometimes Mormon historians and scholars, and I know the best out there, and I'm lucky to interact with them at my day job. I'm the executive director of the Sunstone Education Foundation. And so a lot of your folks, like the FLDS people, know me from Year of Polygamy, but the majority of my work is around what we call the like Mormon diaspora, all the different branches of Mormonism. So my job is to learn about all of them and know as much as I can about all of them. And I do that at Sunstone. So I have access to scholars, and sometimes they forget that like the rest of the world doesn't even know what a Nephi is. You know what I mean? Yeah. So you have to be able to translate that. And yeah, I'm kind of the Urim and Thummim for Mormon history.
Nice. You also look good on TikTok and YouTube. Like people scroll and they see you talking about Joseph Smith. They're like, perfect. This is what I came for.
You know, I actually hate being on camera. Anyone that knows me knows that. Like, if I have to do a Zoom call with my staff, I like having the camera off. It's just lots of years of like internalized Mormon body dysmorphia stuff. So it's not my favorite thing, but I have written a book recently. And so I'm like, on TikTok. So back in the game, man.
Okay.
Putting my face back on the YouTube.
Is your book out yet?
It's going to be out in December. It's called The Ballad of Juanita Brooks, and it's about the historian who uncovered the Mountain Meadows Massacre, which is a big...
God, I got to ask you about that.
Yeah.
But first, let's talk about Joseph Smith versus my dad. So, personally, I have a serious, almost anger towards Mormons because they defend Joseph Smith so vehemently, and they throw Warren Jeffs under the bus. And I see these two individuals as very, very similar in my own mind. And so you have like Warren Jeffs, you could say he's a worse person, right? I don't know how you would see that, but I can see the argument that he's a worse person. He married a 12-year-old, whatever. Didn't Joseph Smith marry like a 14-year-old, right? So I have these debates with Mormons, and I say, how is Joseph Smith better? He married a 14-year-old. My dad married a 12-year-old. He married a 14-year-old. Like, do you support that or what? Yeah. You know? And they always go to saying, oh, it's just a seeding. It was never your dad. They say about Warren Jeffs, he had sexual intercourse. They say about Joseph Smith, he didn't. What do you think about this?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about all of that. First of all, I think your anger is justified. It drives me nuts too. And I will say that when I first started learning about FLDS history, it was kind of this mind labyrinth of like, oh my gosh, what? Because it is a very convenient narrative when you grow up in the LDS church to be like, we're not like that. That's crazy. That's gross. That's dark. And not see it reflected in our own church. And so that was like a huge crisis of faith to be like, oh, we're not that different. Actually, it's very, very similar. And I remember encountering like going down to Shore Creek for the first time and touring Warren's home and it looking like my church house and just being like, what do I do with this? So the similarities are absolutely there, and we can go into that. Second, I would say that one of the biggest differences between your dad and Joseph Smith is that your dad went through the trials of his crimes in a modern court, and they had tape recorders. Joseph Smith didn't have tape recorders, but I wonder if he did, if the outcome would have been different. And so it doesn't mean that that they didn't have similar crimes. Now, there are differences too, and those are important. Your father was able to scale at a way that Joseph Smith, frankly, didn't have time or power to do. And your dad really built on what Joseph Smith did. But I always like to say that Warren Jeffs was cosplaying Joseph Smith. And so a lot of the stuff that we get from Warren Jeffs that is bad, he was trying deliberately to recreate from documents that he found with Joseph Smith. And so we can talk about that if you'd like as well.
I don't think people realize how obsessed my dad was with Joseph Smith. Yeah. He constantly was reading from Joseph Smith. He was going up to Salt Lake Library to get all the documents and books he could. So he was like obsessed. if Joseph Smith were alive today, and you have like the modern courts, DNA, all Netflix, all that stuff, does he end up canonized or does he end up like my dad?
I think he would probably end up like your dad in prison, not murdered. And so what Joseph Smith being killed by a mob did was turn him into a martyr, right? Which is what your dad has tried to recapitulate over and over, because a martyr is far more powerful than a sad guy that like disappears in a prison somewhere, right? And so I think that that's the biggest difference, is that because Joseph Smith was killed by an extra legal mob, it has let him live on in infamy in a way that your dad will probably not.
Yeah, I tell Mormons the best thing that ever happened for Mormonism is Joseph Smith being killed.
It's true. Yeah. We've so at Sunstone, we have this conference at the end of July every year. You're invited to come this year. It's I think July 31st to August 2nd. And we bring all the Mormon scholars to talk about this stuff. And we've done a few sort of playful, imaginative, like what would happen if this happened in history? What do you think would happen? One of the questions often is, what would Mormonism be if Joseph Smith wasn't murdered? And a lot of the theories, and again, they're only speculative, like scholars usually stay in their lane and they stick to the documents. But when they're being speculative, a lot of them think it would have probably petered out into a movement similar of the time. I mean, Joseph had a lot of contemporary movements that were happening, like I'm thinking of the woman Jemima Baker, who believed she was like this unisex, the universal friend. And she had a group that kind of, there's remnants of these groups around, but they've kind of died out. And I think it would have been similar with Joseph Smith.
But he wrote the Book of Mormon and did all that stuff too. So
sure. Yeah. But he wasn't alone. I mean, other people were writing texts as well. I think there were a few things that make him different of his contemporaries that gave him lasting power. But one of them was he was charismatic and he was attractive and he had a lot of powerful friends and he knew how to leverage power. Joseph Smith. Yeah. And in that way, I think he was different. I mean, we can go into the similarities and differences of your dad if you tell me how you want to do it.
Yeah. Well, do you think of a leader like Joseph Smith that has a vision and sets something up like Mormonism is more dangerous, or do you think someone that inherits it like dad? Like, who does more harm? And is one person better than the other?
I mean, from a historical perspective, we don't make moral judgments, right? It should all be neutral. But if I were giving you my personal opinion as someone who grew up in the tradition, I think Joseph Smith's harm is far more scaled than anyone in the movement, because he started it all. And he did set a pattern, whether he meant to or not, of following the prophet. And your dad is only one expression of that. And I've seen in my work, like I said, my job is to track as many Mormon movements as I can. And Joseph Smith's life and the myth of his life has given too many people permission to recapitulate some really terrible things and enact harm at a scale that I think will far outpace your dad.
Yeah, it's crazy because, dad wouldn't exist without Joseph Smith.
Correct, yeah.
But just coming out of Mormonism and out of my dad's family, the mindset that I had, like, I could totally be one of dad's helpers and loyal followers. I can totally see, like, I had to get totally fucked up before I left. Mm. And it's so hard to get out of that. So, like, I don't know, all these Mormons, they can't change without insane pain or something.
Yeah, I think the discomfort has to outgrow the cost of changing, I guess. And so that's where you see it tip. But, that's not to say that your dad has not, enacted incredible harm to people, and like very sort of specific and sometimes strange harm. I mean, as I've helped get FLDS folks a lot of resources, that is a constant issue. And you and I have talked about this before, like getting a therapist that can understand these specific issues is very difficult, like, because some of them are so strange and unique. And so I will say that I don't, as we're comparing, and I'm talking about simply scale of Joseph Smith, I don't want to say like, that doesn't mean that your dad didn't do some very, very terrible things.
No, I like that you say that, because then I can tell them, my Mormon friends, how awful Joseph Smith is.
I mean, he really started a tradition, and because, and I would say, like, you can't just put that on Joseph himself. You have to put it on anyone who carried his myth. And that's why I still claim the heritage, because I think it's really simple and probably too straightforward when people leave and then they're like, I'm not that anymore, and they're bad, and no one ever goes, what was my part in it? I think the real healing is when you go, how did I uphold that system? Let me be responsible for my part in it. And then recreating or redoing, or I won't even say repenting for the wrongs, but I really do think there's something about like acknowledging where you were participating in that. I upheld the myth of Joseph Smith for a long time. I mean, I didn't know better, right? And so the responsibility is not the same as someone who knows better and actively lies, but I would say a lot of the myth that was created, that was deliberately constructed and accidentally constructed about Joseph Smith, has done a lot of harm too.
Well, that's one of the things I hear dads' wives saying who have left, is like, oh, we didn't want that. We weren't into it. And I'm like, yeah, the fuck you were. I was there. You guys were. Nobody was into it more than you guys. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? I see dads' wives, and I know you're like digging up Joseph Smith's wives and stuff, but I want to ask you if it's fair for me to characterize dads' wives as like victims and also
perpetrators. Yeah, I mean, that's the complexity in these systems. And I think that's why it's going to be so hard for all of us to heal as like a generational community, because a lot of us do bad things in God's name. And then when you leave, you're like, well, it wasn't my fault. Yes, and you still were the mechanism. You were the carrier of the thing that did that, right? And so there's not a lot of good language to reconcile that. And especially in your community where you guys were so actively encouraged to harm one another for the system. It feels almost out of place for me to say how to look at that or how to deal with it. I think that it's a very complicated thing. And yeah, what do you do with someone who was indoctrinated their whole lives and victimize people? I mean, it's tricky. And luckily I don't have to make those moral distinctions, but I think anything that you feel about it is justified.
Yeah. So Mormons view polygamy as something that went away. Like, you know better than anybody how they view it today, which I find totally unreasonable. FLDS still live it. They read 132 often. They're always reading these revelations about it. They're doing their best to live it. Historically, who's more how Joseph Smith wanted? Like right now, the FLDS or maybe some of these other fundamental groups, are they more how Joseph Smith intended Mormonism to be? As far as the doctrine and polygamy and stuff? Or are the Mormons closer to how Joseph Smith intended it to be?
It's such an interesting question, because I don't know Joseph Smith's intentions. And for someone who was supposed to be a prophet and seer looking into the future, I don't think he saw what this was going to be, right? And if he does, I hope he's ashamed of it, to be honest with you. He should be. Because the legacy, for all the great that people talk about, it has done a lot of harm onto the world. I mean, it's a very American religion. And I always say it's one of America's biggest cultural exports, because Mormons have gone out into the world to, proselytize and colonize and all of those kind of American ideals. To answer your question, it's not a sexy answer to be like, oh, this one's better, this one's worse. I think they're both expressions of very different Josephs. My church, the LDS, is very corporate. It's an expression of leadership consolidation, greed, money, power, right? If you have looked into the LDS church land holdings, we're the biggest landowners in the world, billions and billions of dollars of, in their hedge funds, obscene amounts of money. And it's very corporatized. Your dad was living, I think the true believer part of Joseph Smith, like the very orthodox religious part. And I think it's worth noting, like you said, people don't understand how obsessed your dad was with Joseph Smith. And on purpose, he was going to recreate the man within himself. And so he probably knows Joseph Smith's documentary history better than any LDS prophet. He's probably spent more time reading his voice and looking in the paperwork than hardly anyone else in LDS leadership. That's probably not true. I know a lot of prophets, and some get really obsessive too. But you know what I mean? Like that was on purpose. That was by design. He wanted to recapitulate how he saw your dad. Now, the critique I would say is your dad is recapitulating Joseph in a modern world. He's giving his own interpretations, his own spin. There's a lot of controversy on some of there are these contested documents in the history about, like, did Joseph Smith author them? Are they really, his, or are they someone else? And your dad didn't really differentiate. If he assumed it was from Joseph, he assumed it was his, right? And so there are those kind of debates, but I think your dad was actively trying to be the spiritual Joseph Smith, and he did a pretty good job as far as those doctrines go.
Well, I think that spiritually, there's something about when you get obsessed with Joseph Smith, because there's a spirituality to it that makes, I feel like, everybody that does it do the same things. And I don't know what it is, but my dad had just such a insane spirituality to him. I think, like, he was obsessed with the Spirit of God, and that he got that from Joseph Smith and the early Mormon leaders. And so he was obsessed with almost living in a different realm. I think that's kind of what happened. As he got more and more obsessed, he almost went into this different realm from reading from these early leaders of the church, because they talked about that a lot. Like Brigham Young says, when you have it, you can see behind you as well as in front of you. And it's just like it's a different existence, Well,
and that's worth pointing out too. So your dad had what Joseph Smith didn't have, which is, Brigham Young's leadership, right? So your dad is in some ways way more like Brigham Young than Joseph Smith. And the only reason I say that is because Brigham Young scales Joseph Smith's thing and then adds his own. And in very many ways, Warren Jeffs is a Brighamite. Like his doctrine is very Brigham influenced. So that's a huge part of it too. And one of the biggest differences between your dad and Joseph Smith, first of all, grew up dirt poor, right? And we can talk about similarities of the childhood too. I'd love to do that. But Joseph Smith also grew up in occult magic. And so he had more freedom to use his imagination. By the time your dad comes to religion and spirituality, it's very conscripted into the Mormon idea. And the patina of magic and mysticism, and frankly, the stuff I think is cool that Joseph Smith pulled from, was completely strip mined from Mormonism when your dad finds it. And so your dad, it's interesting that when he gets into the documents, your dad could have picked up on some of the occult stuff, the Jupiter talisman and the Mars dagger and all of the Renaissance magic stuff that Joseph Smith was in. But your dad takes the Brighamite, stripped down from the folk magic, and now it's this very bureaucratized sort of religion. And so that's kind of a shame, because I think what made Joseph Smith interesting, especially at the beginning, was he was really playful with the universe. He was like, oh, this is fun. This is spooky. This is a good ghost story. We'll put this in. I mean, about the early treasure digs, right? It was like a treasure spirit, like a Spanish ghost guarding treasure chests. Your dad didn't have any of that. He couldn't have fun with it. It was very boring,
Yeah. God, Mormonism is so boring.
It's so boring. And unfortunately, I would say, as far as boring goes, FLDS takes the cake.
Yeah.
You guys have some crazy doctrines, which makes it, I guess, kind of exciting, because exciting in a bad way. Everything is on the line. But man, those sermons, I've listened. Yeah, I'm really sorry. You need your time back, man. I don't know how you get that back.
That's so unfair.
Wouldn't it have been cool if your dad would have thrown in some tarot cards or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's too bad. So Joseph Smith at least had that, at least at the beginning. And then, of course, as he gets more corporatized and powered up, I guess, in Nauvoo, that's when you kind of see what you would recognize as Mormonism.
Yeah. So do you think Joseph Smith and Dad were similar in their childhood or not really?
You know what? Yes and no. Like, there are differences being poverty for Joseph Smith. Your dad grew up in relative wealth and comfort and power because there was an established church. I think that's the biggest difference. Joseph Smith created a tradition and your dad inherited one. Now, Joseph Smith was pulling from other traditions, so it's similar, but he was kind of the founder and your dad inherited it,
well,
right?
You got to give him some credit for that, for sure.
Joseph?
Yeah.
Oh, like, yeah.
That's a pretty crazy thing to do.
He wasn't the only one, though. People need to, this was called the Burnover District. Everyone was doing it.
But he was the only one that anything's lasted from.
That's true. He just did it really well, right? It's like he was like the influencer that rose to the top, right? Even though, and there are a lot of reasons for that.
Imagine if he had YouTube.
I think about that sometimes. Again, it would be a different ballgame if there were a tape recorder in Nauvoo in 1840s. Just different ballgame. But the differences. So those are some of the differences. And there are others, of course, but some of the similarities are they both have like a medical event in their childhood that defines them, right? Your dad was like born 2 months premature and he barely lived and he survived. Joseph Smith has the historic leg story where his leg is almost amputated. They have these like mystical origins where they survive death. They were both really favored and enabled by their mothers. Their mothers told them that they were special little boys, and that they were going to go on to do something great. And I think that was a huge influence on both of them. I think both of their moms were very concerned and interested in helping consolidate their power. And there's some differences, of course, but I think that that's a similarity. And I think an obsessive sort of narcissism with themselves and their importance. Yeah, I think that was similar too.
Okay.
So. And, Rulon had how many kids? 60 something.
Yeah.
Joseph had 10 siblings. So the obvious big differences, but your dad was really athletic, which surprises people that he liked basketball and he played baseball. I mean, he seems so tall and lanky, but he was pretty athletic. Joseph Smith was really athletic. They like to tumble about with the boys. So I guess there's some of that there. So yeah, I can see some similarities, but I think the biggest difference is your dad inherited something that had calcified over time. And then he tried to restore it, right, to what he thought Joseph was doing. But he took the worst parts of it. That's the biggest shame, I think.
Do you feel like Joseph Smith was a pretty strong narcissist when he was young?
I think there's good evidence. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, and I know everyone calls everyone a narcissist now if they don't like them, But yeah, I think so. I think we have evidence to suggest. I don't know that babies are born narcissists.
Really?
Well, maybe babies are narcissists, right? They need everything to be about them. Maybe he never grew out of it. I don't know. But yeah, we have stories of him taking advantage of people from an early age. But I have more compassion for young Joseph because his early life seems like he's surviving, right? There's early stories of him drinking alcohol a lot, getting drunk a lot. His dad was a chronic alcoholic.
Really?
Yeah. After the War of 1812, it kind of decimates the economy. And then they have the big collapse in 1819, which is like the first Great Depression. People lost their jobs and they really could only make money selling alcohol or working in maritime stuff like shipping or anything with sailing. And so Joseph Smith's family starts a beer and pub, like a beer and cake stand. So Lucy is selling beer and Joseph Sr. struggles with alcohol the rest of his life. Like there are stories of him disappearing even, in Kirtland in Missouri. He would go get on a drunken bender and disappear for a long time. And then they'd have to find him. And so in a lot of ways, I think Joseph Smith was trying to give his dad some dignity because his dad would always get taken advantage of by people. His dad was the one into treasure digging and Spanish ghosts and all that kind of stuff, which is really common. These were very superstitious, mystical people. So, they believe Spanish gold was hidden everywhere, and his dad was always going to find it and always on the verge of finding it. And then he invests in this ginseng trade and it falls apart. He loses all of Lucy's money and he just can't get his act together. And so I think in some ways, Joseph Smith was haunted by that and was caught up in his own ghosts. I mean, there's stories of him, his family, they have to become like these tenant farmers, getting whatever work they can. And they're working on the Durfee farm. And Joseph Smith is stealing alcohol from Mrs. Durfee's cabinet and getting drunk and revelating, talking about angels and ghosts and whatever. And so she allegedly switched out the liquor with pepper sauce to trick him. So Joseph Smith had trouble doing that. There are stories of Joseph Smith Sr. going into town and talking about angels and visions and treasures, and people just thought he was kind of a town fool. And so Joseph really was overcompensating, I think. And my personal take on the history was, once he had this treasure spirit story, which evolved over time. Like I said, it was a Spanish ghost. It was the slippery treasure that maybe it's here, and then we go to dig it up and then it slips under the earth and we were so close, we almost had it. And they kept doing that until he gets the story of the gold plate and realizes that the treasure spirit becomes an angel. And now the angel guards this thing, and people start to, once he realizes, if we give it the institutional backing of religion rather than this mystical stuff, people take it seriously. And then he meets Sidney Rigdon, who was this very accomplished, respected, trained preacher.
Here, one thing. Was Joseph Smith super sincere in this gold plate thing?
You know what? Who knows? That's the historical evidence can argue for any of it. Personal opinions, I don't know. I go all over the place. I think it was probably a mix of both.
Because I think, well, let me ask you, does intelligence matter more for starting a religion, or confidence? Like just full-blown, this is how it is, guys, I think confidence. I think if we would look at any other movements that start, right, you don't have to be particularly intelligent. You just have to be charismatic and have a good story. Yeah, it's like dating. If you're super confident, then it works. If you have an IQ of above 130, you're statistically 3 times less likely to get laid.
Well, if you're smart, you're probably getting in your own way a little bit about maybe I shouldn't start a cult, right? Maybe I don't take advantage of people. And even if it's not a compassionate risk, that is a bad thing to do to other people. It's this could maybe get me into legal trouble or whatever, Joseph Smith certainly, I do think, was incredibly intelligent. I don't think you pull off what he did as long as he did without being incredibly gifted. And, the angry part of me doesn't want to give him that.
I think his IQ was 130 or something.
I don't know.
I'll bet it was.
I think he was gifted for sure. And there are all kinds of academic scholarly debates on the origins of the Book of Mormon. The LDS story that we were told is very similar to you. This poor farm boy that through this, translated this miraculous thing. How could a poor farm boy do this? Well, a very resourceful one could figure it out. And I think when you are faced with the absolute crushing poverty coupled with humiliation, there are stories of Joseph Smith's family when his dad's schemes would fall apart, that people would come and throw literal shit at their house. We're talking humiliation. And so he was highly motivated to make something of himself. And so, I think an intelligent person with confidence can do amazing things or really dangerous things.
I can't stand how Mormonism turns it into why do they have to turn it into such a boring story? We want to hear of these crazy ass stories. Joseph Smith could be a way cooler story.
Church would have been more fun. Yeah.
God, they turned it into a boring story.
I know. That's the shame of modern Mormonism, is that most people are giving their lives to a very dry, stripped down doctrine. And let me say something nice about Mormonism.
Okay.
Mormonism isn't all bad, right? It taught me some Christian values of kindness and, integrity and all of those things, because Mormonism was also made up of many, many people. And a lot of those people were honest, sincere, good people trying to do their best. And thank God for them, because they gave Mormonism the credibility that it did to be good. That also upheld the shadow side, the darkness of it, right? And so for whatever bad stuff was introduced, you can't deny that there was something that attracted people. And so I'm going to give believers that there is an interpretation of Mormonism that is beautiful. However, it is constricted by loyalty to the institution and obedience to what I think are prophets with absolutely no prophetic wisdom or insight outside of, any get help book that you can get off the internet. Like, there is the beauty that comes from Mormonism, and there is some exists within the heart of good people. And it is extracted through, a really boring mechanism now that is just orthodoxy and obedience.
Is there good in, what do you think about the spiritual side of Joseph Smith? Was he tripping?
Well, there's theories about that. There are theories about that, right? It's called the ethneogenic theory of Mormonism, which taps into the ethneogenic theory of religion, which is basically that all big religious movements come from some sort of psychedelic, psychotropic experience that someone has and then gets like translated to a sober person and then becomes a sober religion, right? There is that theory with Joseph Smith. There's very compelling evidence. You can look at Cody Nakoni, Bryce Blankeneagle's work, and other scholars who've looked into this. They believe that Joseph Smith might have had access to psychedelic doTERRA root, things like that. We do know that Lucy Mack was experimenting with different tinctures and herbs, like many women and many people around her. They had access to drugs. Humans have always had, for a long, long time, access to drugs. And so that is possible. I mean, if you map the Kirtland ecstatic experience, right, where they're seeing heavenly angels and whatever, if you look at those experiences, you can map them over a mushroom trip. It's about 6 hours long. At one point, he asks everyone to lay down. People are laying down. They're seeing steamboats going across the sky. Like, if you tripped on mushrooms, you're like, oh, hey, that makes sense. And I would like to say that anyone that dismisses that theory, I don't think I can have a conversation with you unless you've had a psychedelic experience, because it's hard to explain otherwise.
Yeah, I think it's a possibility, but I think, like we were talking about, my dad's sermons are so boring. I think the problem, though, is when you get into it enough that you are kind of in this other spiritual whatever, you are almost having psychedelic experiences.
Yeah.
Like my dad, I wouldn't be surprised, because I had it happen to me. Like, it's boring until you get there. And
well,
then
that could be a trance experiment. I mean, like early folk magic, spiritualism, they had something called a trance state where people would deliberately try to get into these meditative gamma wave in their brain, right? And so it's absolutely possible. I believe that humans have incredible untapped abilities in the brain that we don't understand. And so even though your dad found a way to, take the most boring version, I think the relentless boredom of it became almost meditative, got your brain into a certain frequency that could put you in a place where you're having, all kinds of.
I think that's what happened to him, though. I think he went, I don't know what you call it. I don't want to say psychotic, where you get in there and you can't pull back out. Yeah.
Like a psychotic break almost. Like he crosses the threshold and he's stuck there. Yeah,
the threshold into this other reality, and that's all he believes after.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about that a lot. Like, let me go to Joseph Smith, and I want to talk about your dad and like OCD and things like that. So Joseph Smith, you ask about his sincerity. I do think that there was a sincere boy in there. I believe that there was a sincere mystic. I mean, if you look at his family's beliefs and the atmosphere, you're probably not familiar with this reference, but there are movies and cartoons and books called The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Have you heard of this?
No.
Okay. It's
way too fucking boring of a Mormon.
Well, I know, and you haven't seen very many movies. We're going to change that.
Yeah.
But
nice. Thank you. God.
In New England at the time, it's a famous ghost story that comes out of New England about this headless horseman that would like cut off your head if you crossed a bridge, right? And they've turned it into movies. I always refer to that because that's what Joseph Smith and his family, that was where they were steeped in. They believed everything was magic. Ghosts were everywhere. Like the land was enchanted. And I still find this when I go out to rural fundamentalist communities, people that are like cut off from the world. When you're in the land, the magic of the universe is so animated for people. Like things are spooky and alive. And so Joseph Smith had that. I do believe that was sincere. I believe at some point he probably had to make a choice in his brain. How much of this is my bullshit and how much of this is happening? And I don't know if he lied to himself or he made a conscious choice to lie to others. But at some point, his integrity, if it existed, was absolutely co-opted by his greed and his ambition and his shadow sides, right? Your dad, in some ways, if I were to have compassion for your dad, which I know no one wants to hear, but I've always thought about your dad as like a 7-year-old kid, like eating Cheerios at the table, if he's allowed Cheerios. And like, how does that translate into what we know now? And I think a lot of it is not just the pressures that your dad grew up in and the really toxic scripts that they gave for men like him to perform. Like his pathway was kind of like designated and chosen for him. And that's really tragic. But I think your dad has some sort of, probably many undiagnosed mental illness, scrupulosity and OCD. I think Mormonism, by the time we all inherited it, including your dad, the rules had compounded because you have all these new prophets and they have to add new stuff. And then they have their interpretations from other, apostles and just people adding all these layers and rules. It becomes so impossible and contradictory that to be obedient to it, you have to become hypervigilant and incredibly OCD and scrupulous about it. And your dad he has all the markers of that, right? Like his obsession with these old documents to the point that, I heard this one famous story about your dad really trying to push blood atonement onto the people, this frontier doctrine of Brigham Young, right? And he was, he had this document to back it up and this document, and that his father, Rulin, slams his fist on the table and says, enough. Stop talking about that. Enough. Like, so that obsession to me, like, what would the world be like today if your dad had just been sent to a therapist and like had it, was able to work that out and had some healthy stuff introduced? Instead, it just got worse and worse and worse. And then I think your dad probably experienced a lot of trauma and sexual shame as a child that, because he had no language to make sense of it, because there was no healthy discourse on like the abuse that's happening in our communities, right? And so he used Joseph Smith's language to make sense of it. And I think one of the most dangerous things that happen in our community is when you're hurt by other people, by power, coercion, control. Sometimes that gives some people an entitlement. I'm hurt, so I can hurt others because I'm hurt. And I think your dad took it a step further and not only said the entitlement was his to perpetrate onto everyone else, but that he was going to find a religious justification for it. And in fact, an entitlement from God. And so that's kind of my theory on how your dad became that 7-year-old kid to what he became now. And I think if anyone is smart, it's a warning, not to say that anyone is going to end up like your dad. But I do know plenty of people who feel like the ends justify the means because they've been hurt, they can hurt others. And that's what turns a victim into a perpetrator.
Okay, but I see people like my dad all through these Mormon groups, and they don't have the same opportunity, but they're very similar in the way, like they're justifying this through their Mormon doctrine and that and all these things. And I'm just like, you guys, and they all say things like, we're unjust, we're so much different. I'm like, yeah, you're doing the fucking same thing.
Yeah, I mean, so to use doctrine to justify harm, it is so it's
so
it's
easy,
evil.
though.
It's so evil, but it's easy.
Okay, but they don't see it, do they?
That's where I get tongue-tied, because I'm like, I have been accused of being too soft on harm because I'm trying to understand it. And so let me be clear, there's never, like, what your dad has done, it's not even for me to speak on. The harm that he's perpetrated, I have only witnessed. Like, I have not been the victim of, and so I don't want to tell anyone how to feel.
Well, I want to say something, because everybody around my dad, absolutely, like, if my dad said, I remember when he did say, I'm not the prophet anymore, everybody's like, no, you are definitely the prophet. And for 3 months, he said, I'm not the prophet. But his brothers came, they said, you're the prophet. My grandpa, who was been in the religion before my dad, also was like, we're supporting the prophet. You guys don't doubt anything. So people have this idea that Warren Jeffs was the only power behind the FLDS, but he wasn't. It was all his wives. It really was. If he doubted himself, his wives were there to tell him, like, no, like, you got this. I really believe every single person in that community, like, even if Warren Jeffs walked away, they would be like, no, you're our prophet. Like, so
yeah, they upheld it.
People have this idea that these groups are so controlled by one person, but it's more like a shared delusion of just, I don't know.
Yeah, and when we're talking about complicity and who's guilty and who's not, that is above my pay grade to decide. I think karma is its own justice in some ways, like, and we're never going to get the justice that is required in our communities because the pain is so deep and it's so dark. And as we know, like, especially in the FLDS community, I've seen things that have made it hard for me to get up out of bed in the morning because the darkness extends, right? Pain just is passed along forever. But I think if anyone listening out there knows that they did harm, and for whatever reason, maybe you believed it at the time or whatever, yes. And it was a tragedy that you were raised in a culture where that stuff was so normalized. But if you can give justice to the people that you've helped, you should do that, because that's the only justice we're going to get, is people looking at how they were complicit. And that takes some real ugly looks in the mirror. But to your point, like, do they know they're doing it? That's the hard part, because you're right. They're not controlled by one person. It's a system. And that's why your very first question about, like, who did more harm, this goes back to Joseph Smith. Does Joseph Smith, could he account for the rotten fruit that came from what he grew? I don't think he could fathom how bad it would get. That said, like, he started something that just set us all on fire, and we have to put ourselves out, because I think that harm is so normalized. And I'll just give you, this is an abstract example, but I was talking to, I do a lot of work in film and a lot of work in writing and in Westerns now. I'm doing a lot of work in Westerns. And so Porter Rockwell, everyone wants a Porter Rockwell movie. And, I've been approached by people who want, faithful Mormons who want, like, Porter Rockwell to have his due. And it has not worked out between us, because they see Porter Rockwell as this, like, righteous hero. And I see him as a terrifying murderer in the hand of a zealot, like, he's a mobster. He's the mobster's right-hand man, which is a great movie, by the way.
Yeah.
But it is not how we were raised to see him. And so I was talking with a fan of Porter Rockwell, and Porter Rockwell is very important to him. And it was interesting when I was trying to understand why he thought Porter was a good guy. And I was, like, trying to really drill down. And it was just very clear at one point and I try to be really polite with people and understand that they grew up with a mindset that is incorrect history. But I said, people are going to, if we defend Porter on screen, it's like defending Warren Jeffs. Like, Porter's cause is not righteous, right? Joseph Smith was marrying 14-year-old girls. And he just instinctively said, well, that's just how it was back then. That's just, and he started to talk to me about, girls that menstruate and it's okay if you, and I was like, oh, buddy, I'm going to stop you right there. I corrected him on like, that is not, that are we gorillas? Like, are we primal apes? Is that who we want to be? Like, because gorillas and primates act this way, humans should do that? Like, that's the argument you're making. Like, first of all, it was not normalized to marry 14-year-olds. There's a reason Joseph Smith was murdered by an extra legal mob, right? People did not think his beliefs were kosher. They did not think his behavior with women was cool or normal or just what they did back then.
So you're pretty much saying he got murdered because he was marrying 14-year-olds.
That's a huge part of it.
Yeah.
It's a huge part of it. And you can argue it's a ceiling or not, but if you look at Helen Mar Kimball, who was the 14-year-old we're speaking of, if you look at her life, she resented it her whole life. Even though she stayed faithful to the church, she talked about the pain that it caused. She talked about not being able to go to dances in Nauvoo with kids her age because she was married to the prophet. Now you tell me, if he's not sleeping with her, and let's just throw them a bone and say it was all on the up and up. I don't know why sealing yourself sexually to or romantically or spiritually to a 14-year-old is on the up and up. But let's give them that bone for a minute. Then why did Helen Mar not get to be a normal kid? It withheld her from that life. Sex abuse is about power and control and coercion. What happened to Helen Mar, whether he touched her or not, was about power, control, and coercion. The results are the same. So when people try to argue he slept with his wives or not, my eyes glaze over. I'm like, that's not the point of the power and control and coercion. The elements are the same. Helen Mar was depressed the rest of her life. She would be so depressed, Eliza R. Snow would have to come over and they would try to get her out of bed. This was not a woman who had a healthy upbringing and healthy life. Her parents traded her to a man that I believe was deeply predatory for their salvation. That would break me too.
Yeah, it's like if a modern leader of the church got sealed to a 14-year-old and they were over at their house occasionally, and you could say, oh, they just got sealed. I think Mormons are out of their fucking minds. I want to sometimes take a baseball bat and just whack their butt when they're trying to make these arguments to me because they're so bullshit. Like, oh, and I grew up liking order in Porter Rockwell too. But one time I was talking to some missionaries and I heard this story growing up and I have no idea where it comes from. But the story is that there's this man who, tells Brigham Young that he's going to do a bunch of harm and he's headed back east. And Brigham Young says you won't make it out of Utah. And Orrin Porter Rockwell is coming into Utah. And this man laughs and tells Orrin Porter Rockwell, Brother Brigham said I won't make it out of Utah. And so Orrin Porter Rockwell pulls out his pistol and shoots him. It's like, you didn't make it out of Utah. I don't know if that's a true story. But like we heard a lot of those stories,
and we thought they were funny, right? We're
yeah.
like, oh, that guy, that murder, ha ha ha. Like, I get it because I do love a good John Wayne movie. I know I shouldn't, but I do. Like the romanticization of the West is something that we all do. It's us dealing with like the impact our ancestors have with like pillaging the earth and displacing and murdering indigenous people. Like. We're like, oh, let's, make a fun movie and a song about it and it'll all be okay. So I get why we do that. Porter Rockwell killed teenage boys, dragged them on a horse in front of their mother. Like,
really?
He was, I think he was proud of it. He was really good at it. Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of the murders that he carried out, and we're never going to know the true body count, right? Because he didn't talk like Bill Hickman did, who was another enforcer of Brigham Young's. This was a cold-blooded killer. I don't think he was a reluctant killer. I don't think he was a conflicted killer. And if D. Michael Quinn, who is a very famed historian, very detailed historian, also gay, Michael Quinn sees Porter Rockwell as a man in love with Joseph Smith. And Porter Rockwell actually didn't really live polygamy. He didn't have a lot of wives that lived at the same time. He wasn't really his vice wasn't women. We'll put it that way. And so I don't know what motivated Porter, but I know the stories we tell about him are part of the problem. When we see, I took a bunch of people to the Mountain Meadows Massacre site, which is a site where 120 innocent men, women, and children were murdered in cold blood by Mormons pretending to protect them. And then the Mormons, of course, cover it up and blame it on the Paiutes and other native bands, which causes destruction and harm to the tribes they're still living in the wake of that. And we're telling these Mormons, and including Mormon fundamentalists, these cute teenage boys from a Mormon fundamentalist sect, they're good kids, they're just raised in this tradition. And we're telling them this story. And the historian Barbara Jones Brown is talking about how the Mormons turn their guns and shoot these immigrants at point blank range. And one of the boys goes, "Cool." And I was just like, buddy, no, no. Like, we take the wrong lessons. And that's what happens when you have a bunch of frontier men who start what, I'm going to just be blunt, is kind of a frontier sex cult. And they're predatory and they're scamming people and they're using the government. And now we've lost all the LDS listeners. They're like, we can't trust what she says. I'm sorry. I know your story. I know your take on it is different, but this is also another perspective. These guys were breaking the law. We have proof of that. How many times was Joseph Smith in jail? How many times were him and his buddies in jail? We have stories of coercion and predatory control. When you have predators as your leaders, you have to make them righteous. You develop an entire culture that justifies abuse and harm. And that's what we have today. And that's what your dad just walks right into. And so really, the pump was already primed for your dad when he walked in. So whether people are born a predator and your dad just always had it in him, or he was formed that way, I don't know. That's above my knowledge and expertise. But I will say that Mormonism is rife. Timothy Kosnoff, who is a non-Mormon attorney that handles a lot of the sex abuse cases with the LDS Church, he says all the time, Mormonism is catnip for predators. We are perfect because we are primed to justify bad behavior, to even think it's cool, like in the Mountain Meadows Massacre, scenario, but also to trust anyone. And so that's why we have all these MLMs and all these scams and financial fraud. And I always say we're the true crime genre for a reason. Mormons will be like, we're persecuted, we're being misrepresented. Are we? Like, that's the thing that I think is so hard, is when you grow up in the church, you grow up with this narrative of we're these pious pilgrims. Are we? Do you know what's going on in your neighbor's basement? Do you know about all the sexual abuse that everyone is perpetrating on each other? Like, are we what you think that we are? And I think people don't want to deal with that, right? Because that's pulling up a rug of 200 years of really dark shadows that we have tried to turn into some sort of romance of whatever it is now.
Okay, I gotta ask. This isn't going to be the easiest question to answer, but there is something about winning that people love. And I believe at a very fundamental human nature level, humans just admire winning more than they admire morality. They always say the moral thing. They love winning. They don't care if somebody's killed 1,000 people. They just love the story. They forget all the people they've murdered. They just love the good story. It's like, oh my God, look at what this guy did. It's the same way with women. Joseph Smith loved, or he had a problem with women. My dad had a problem with women. I remember this conversation I had with some of Dad's wives. We were talking about his youngest wife. He married her at 12, and they had sexual intercourse. Me and a few of my sisters were arguing against a few of Dad's older wives. We were saying, if this was some other 12-year-old with some other guy, you guys would be condemning it. And they agree with that. But they just love the winner. They just love they defend it. I've never seen somebody defend dad's underage wives like his other wives before they leave. Like all of them, you know? And I know they were raised in that. I just don't, like, when I look at the Mormon culture, you would think that girl who's being abused by the bishop hates it. But I don't know if that's true. I think when she gets older and understands what happened, she will. But will she walk away? I think most of the time the answer is no. Like, I remember back when the Texas raid happened, and God, I would have killed anybody for Dad at that time. Like, you know what I'm saying? I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to say that the culture, to some degree, loves itself. And if you're raised there, I guess even if you aren't, like, people look at Warren Porter Rockwell, even if there's horrific stories, and there's just automatically something they like about him.
Yeah, no, I mean, same. Like, that's why it goes back to, I still claim the Mormon identity. And you've heard my true opinions here, which, you know, I'm probably criticized the most when I speak very frankly about, like, saying it's a frontier sex cult. Because it was. Why? Because it, you know, our culture, it's so normalized. It is so normalized, and we don't even have a language. So I'm going to use an example and on something you just said when you're talking about a 12-year-old having sexual intercourse. That's the term you use. We can't even call it rape, right? Because a 12-year-old cannot consent to that, right? She's a child. So even if she's saying yes and enthusiastically because that's what she's been groomed to do, we don't have language around it. And you certainly couldn't have used that word in the church, right?
No.
Absolutely not. But it's hard to use it now. Like, and Mormon historians do this all the time. We have this patina of language that we've placed over these things. Plural marriage. We don't want to call it polygamy. Plural marriage is the higher law. Polygamy is the lower law. We don't want to call it predatory. We call it, divine revelation, or that's just how things were done back then, or whatever language we use to protect. So you said the culture loves itself. It's also self-protecting. And so we're, again, if you make it easy and you say Joseph Smith was a cult leader or a predatory guy, and people don't like the word cult, especially in the academic community, again, talking as a historian, you don't use words like that, right? Because it assumes a moral judgment and you're trying to be neutral. But if you take all of that out and you just say, these were predators running a spiritual organization. And yeah, some good came out of it because there were good people in there and they needed to be co-opted in a certain way. But they also needed their bad behavior excused. That's your answer to Mormonism. We have a cool culture who has built protections around predators. And if you look into the LDS church, this is why, to point fingers at the FLDS and say you're bad, scandal after scandal after scandal after scandal after church leader who's sexually abusing people. And frankly, I think that the sex abuse thing is so pervasive in our community because we don't have healthy sex narratives. And I know that in your community, you have so many kids left unattended. So kids are experimenting with each other at young ages. And then they're like, does that make me a predator? There's distinctions between kids experimenting and a 56-year-old marrying a 12-year-old girl and forcing her into this situation. And we have no discourse. No one knows how to talk about these things. And so everyone feels complicit. So then they feel like they have to make excuses. People feel guilty. They feel shame. They say, well, if I condemn that, what does that say about me? And that's why I ask people, take care of your own work. That's the way. But you have to look at it. You have to look at it. And yes, it was unfair that what happened to you, but look at the parts of you that made that okay. And those are the parts that you need to work on. And I have to tell you, I have been unpacking this stuff for 15 years and I'm still finding ways that I'm like, oh man, how did I not see that? Like, because it's like drilled into our skulls. Like, this is DNA stuff for some of us, right? My ancestors defended this stuff for generations. and their lives depended on it. They had to cooperate to survive, to eat, to live. That doesn't go away just because like I learned Joseph Smith like did some bad things and I walk away and don't go to church on Sunday, right? That's still embedded in you. And so that's the thing that I think a lot of people don't like hearing either, is like, it's really easy to point the finger at some big institution. And the anger is justified, and I understand that too, but you also need to be unpacking it within yourself because it's there. The ways that you defend it, the ways that you protect it, the ways that you make sense of it, and the way that you let yourself off the hook for how you made it okay. And I made it okay because everyone around me made it okay, right? Like, I didn't know the difference. I didn't know some things were bad until I learned that they were bad, but something in me always kind of knew. And that's the thing that I think is really tragic, is Mormonism spends a lot of time shushing that voice. We have the LDS discourse, and you can tell me how you grew up with the Holy Ghost, but if something made us uncomfortable, it was from Satan.
Yeah.
And right there, that is the biggest red flag of the doctrine. Things that make you uncomfortable are usually your instinct telling you there's danger or there's something bad, or anything that requires growth makes you uncomfortable, right? You have to be confronted with something. And so right there, we're stopping people from growing outside of anything, and we're stopping them from trusting their own instincts. And that is a recipe for so much abuse, coercion, and control.
Okay, but that's what I was also saying about Dad. He got super into that. You know, he taught it a lot, for one. I think that's why they get into the underage wives. They're obsessed with this spiritual power. They think it's helping them talk to God and stuff. And these underage marriages, like, whatever that power is, it increases. Whatever happens, they're getting more of it somehow. I really believe that's why all of them get into underage marriages.
Interesting. I think there's something there about the shame that you feel when you to dominate anyone sexually is to steal their power, right? And so perhaps your dad felt his power was taken away from him at an early age. And, you know, speaking for myself as a survivor, when that power was taken from me, you want to get your power back. And there are healthy ways to do that, and there are very unhealthy ways. And it seems to me like your dad decided that he would do what was done to him and he would take it from other people. And I think that might create, I would imagine that creates a shame that is ravenous, that cannot be filled. And so you're always going to want to be stealing power. And if you look at your dad, that's what he did. He didn't know how to get power naturally. He knew how to steal it from people. Getting power naturally is not forcing people with fear and coercion and penalties and threats. It works. You can control people that way. That works. That's not real leadership and power, right? Leadership and power is someone who is someone you want to emulate, who has natural courage, who stands up and has a moral compass and center, who doesn't need to force people into something. But your dad needed power by stealing it.
I think one of the reasons I feel so upset at Mormons is I see my dad in a lot of these Mormons. The way they talk about how they do things. Even the ones, I've had so many bishops take a lot of interest in me, and president of stakes and stuff try to like convert me. And I'm like, dude, this is like my dad. Yeah. I can't believe, like, this person, they have a lot to say about Dad, but God, the way they're talking about the church, the way they're justifying everything, the way they're trying to convince me to join, you're my fucking dad. And then I start talking about Dad, and they have all these things they want to say, but their reasoning is almost like Dad's, even against Dad. I'm like, God, I can't even explain to you how stupid you look.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it must feel like to be you and to see that hypocrisy, because just from my experience growing up LDS, it was shocking and unnerving and still feels deeply unfair to me. I cannot imagine I cannot imagine the patience it must take to talk to people about this, because the ignorance is so huge, but it's also a little bit deliberate. Like, this information is out there now. But when we bump up against these trigger wires of everybody, like I'm a walking trigger for people. The way that I talk, the way that I look, it just sets something off in people, and they want to hate me for it. I'm used to that now. I'm used to all kinds of nonsense being told about me, because it's easier to blame than to look inward, right? So if we can deflect and distract ourselves from, it's Warren Jeffs' fault. Well, Warren Jeffs is at fault for a lot of things, and we can go into all of those, but like, that's not what they're talking about, right? And when they want to distinguish that, I don't know who they think that they're talking to when they're talking to you, like trying to say this is bad, but this is somehow better. You, of all people, can recognize the patterns in what they're doing, but they can't.
They can't.
And that's the frustrating part.
Well, the frustrating part is that when I'm talking to them, I'm like, you don't know how good of a conversation you could have with my dad. You have no idea. And if he talked to you for a half an hour, you would probably join what he was doing. You probably would. Did
you think your dad was charismatic? Because I only listened to sermons and recordings. I've never met your dad. And so I found him incredibly dry and boring. But like, I wasn't primed to see that as like cool.
No, Dad's sermons, I think at times could be charismatic, but I would say Dad was charismatic. He's a whole different person when he's doing the sermons. Mm-hmm. When he walks in the door, he's always happy. He's laughing. He's playing with the children. He has a brother, Isaac, who's also extremely charismatic. Everybody loves him. If Dad was on the construction job, he never had to be like the top guy. He was always just helping. He was encouraging people. Yeah, I would say he was pretty charismatic in his life, not in his sermons.
It's interesting. I mean, in the LDS church, like the thing that I get a little embarrassed for my people for now is when they will share a quote from a prophet or like a clip from our conference of a prophet speaking, and they're like, isn't that powerful? Isn't that beautiful? And they don't realize that outside people think it's incredibly creepy, right? They're just like, oh, that old guy, like he seems really angry and why is he talking in such a soft voice? Like they don't know it because I grew up venerating these guys. And so and in Mormonism, this is FLDS too, like the more you get into power, the more kind and soft your voice gets. And we actually call it the primary voice because it mimics like primary teachers talking to children like, oh, aren't you so sweet? Like that. And women in leadership adopt that voice, and so do men. And, you know, when we were talking about the Sam Bateman thing, like I was leaked early, like when it was leaked to law enforcement, those tapes of men giving their children to him as wives. And their voices are so sweet and their language is so kind and nice. And like, you would never know by their affect that they are orchestrating something disgusting and evil and awful and wrong. It's because it's almost like the worse you get, the nicer your voice gets, as to like mask it or something. And so men in leadership are these like in the LDS church are like these old grandfatherly guys with these very soft voices and this affect. And people don't realize like that does not read as powerful. It is not persuasive to anyone outside of it. But when you grow up in it, you're like, that's what I want to be. That's what power looks like. That's what cool looks like. And then you meet like Maya Angelou and you're like, oh, that's actual wisdom. Like that's how someone with power talks. But you just don't see it until you can have some distance from it. And so it's the tricky part because we're dealing with people who have never had anything else to disrupt them from that.
Yeah, and that's another good comparison for Mormons to look at my dad and realize like you listen to his voice, you might think it's creepy. Everybody there doesn't think it's creepy at all. It's the very same. They think it's great. And if you listen to other FLDS men give sermons, they'd be very similar to Dad's, you know. It'd be a very similar talk pattern. It wouldn't be some charismatic speech. It'd be very similar to Dad's. That's how everybody gave sermons in the FLDS. So it wasn't unique to Dad, you know.
Yeah.
He had his own style, but I
almost think if we put Joseph Smith, like the frontier guy, and he was a rough and tumble frontier boy, like rough and tumble. If we put him and no one knew who he was and we set him on a pulpit at church, people would be offended.
Oh.
Like, and he, I mean, I would be, maybe that would be divine justice to have him see what his church has become. But I wonder what he would think of it too. You know, it's so, in my tradition, it's just so corporate and boring, and it forces people to not change and to not grow. That's why you get repetitive stuff every week. It's the same stuff regurgitated in different language. And that's not to say that people can't grow. I know a lot of good people inside the church, but the system is like giving them constituted military food over and over and over for spiritual nourishment. And like, how can you become wise from that? You know, I feel an incredible amount of compassion for people still stuck in the system, because life is so big and so expansive and so rich. And it's a richness that even Joseph Smith and all of his struggles was able to pull from. And he had that, and you don't even have that, you know, and that's a tragedy of modern Mormonism, is people are living very constricted lives and told that that's what happiness is, with very little to compare it to. And I'll have converts that tell me sometimes, like, Mormonism, I know what it was like before, and Mormonism has come to that to help me achieve that. I will not discount that Mormonism has a steadying, stabilizing factor, because it is so regulated. So if you came from a lot of chaos, I could see how that might be better. But as someone who grew up in it and was told this is what happiness was defined for me, family was defined for me, joy was defined for me, and I thought that the definitions given to me were universal definitions, only to realize that joy is very individual and subjective. Having gone outside of that, being like, oh, yeah, the world is so much richer, but it's also so much harder. And it's John Larson, who's a famous LDS ex-Mormon podcaster, talks about it being on a cruise ship, right? Like, being in the church is like being on a cruise ship. They feed you, you're going to get the meal at the same time. You know the schedule, you're with the same people. But there are people off on little rafts on the ocean, seeing incredible things that you will never see, and going on adventures that you will never go. And sometimes their storms and their seas will be a lot bigger because they don't have the protection of the cruise ship. But what a life, you know, what an adventure. And that's what it feels like when you step out of Mormonism. You get off the cruise ship and you're like, oh man, that kind of sucked. I had a little single room cabin with the same people my whole life. And now I'm off on this little raft, and it fucking sucks. Like, it's hard to row by yourself. But look at the sunset, and look at the stars, and look at this island over here and this island over here. That's what I think it's like when you leave. But you can't explain it to someone who's only been on a cruise ship their whole life.
It's such a trip, though, because I viewed the world. Yeah, I can't even describe how much of a trip it's been. So my life's almost been like tripping on mushrooms. At least after I started coming out, you know. It's like, oh my God.
Well, I think in some ways, if I were to get spiritual again, I think it's interesting that so many of us came from an experience where at 10 years old, I knew all the answers to the world's most difficult questions. Like, I knew them. I had it all figured out, which is an insane thing.
Yeah.
Because part of living life is the mystery of it. And when you lose a worldview that you were so certain of, and that everyone around you was so certain of, it's a gift to be so wrong.
Yeah.
Like, that is truly a gift, and it hurts, and it is painful, and it kicks your ass all the time. But what a gift. And I don't know that everyone gets to have an experience as concentrated as we do. Some people do. It's archetypal. Everyone gets to have the experience of being wrong, but being so wrong about everything and losing so much on the line to be that wrong. I think that there's an incredible adventure and beauty in that if you can come out the other side. But it's hard and it causes a lot of anger, and the anger is real.
I have a kind of a problem.
Okay.
And it's, maybe you can help me.
We'll see. I'm not a therapist.
So I kind of like Brigham Young.
Oh no, we're gonna have to fight over this.
I think part of it is because for so much of modern Mormonism, I feel like if I get out Brigham Young's sermons, he just ruins them. You know, like, I can't always fall back to Joseph Smith, but I can always destroy Mormons with Brigham Young's words. You know,
fair enough.
I feel that way. And maybe that's why, maybe I just admire like the boldness, because I don't necessarily support like him hurting other people.
Sure, yeah.
But I guess it's just like my human nature, whatever. I like winners for whatever. You know?
He reminds me of Oscar Wilde has this quote that he says, make people laugh. Tell people the truth, but make them laugh or they'll kill you. And of course, he was speaking about being a gay man, about like telling things, and he had to make them laugh for his survival. But I think about that sometimes. Brigham Young, he was so funny. And I hate that he was so funny because there's something charming about it. And like, he has become this sort of like totem, this archetype for me, to the scapegoat, right? Like, I put all my rage into Brigham Young, which is not fair. It's like, you know, I believe the internet is different than like, if I met someone in your internet comments that are saying mean things about me, like if they saw me to my face, very few of them would behave the same, right?
Correct.
So I understand that if I saw Brigham Young, it might be different in person, but he's a very convenient person for me to just dump like all the problems are his fault. But he was so funny, and I hate he was, because sometimes I'm like, damn it, that was such a good joke. You're a terrible man. But that was really funny. Yeah, he has this joke about one of the judges. He was always in struggles with federal judges and Mormon judges, and there was a judge that had a bad eye. I don't know if I told you this yet.
No.
He couldn't see out of one eye, and Brigham would always talk about how to sneak around the government, and he was like, we'll just, you know, make sure you're working with Judge Cradlebaugh's good eye. It's just like, oh man, that's so funny. Damn it. But yeah, I feel similarly, like the boldness, but maybe that can be your window into compassion of why people still are attached to these things, right? Like, it's going to be in us in ways that we can't see. And I think we spend the rest of our life sort of unpacking that. That doesn't mean you need to be in your Mormon trauma the rest of your life, right? The world is big. But there are still ways that, like, I think if you lose compassion for the Jaden that was stuck in it, like you said, you would have killed for your dad.
Yeah.
What is owed to that kid? And if you can do that, it can give you some compassion for these folks. Because there's a whole other side of the internet comment section I'll notice when I'm talking about this, that they're like, Mormonism is a cult, full stop. Like, Joseph Smith is a predator and you can't defend it. It's like, unless you have lived it and believed it so ardently and also used it to harm other people. I always say I was a really good Mormon and a terrible person. The better Mormon I was, the meaner I was to my friends who weren't Mormon, right? Like, that's not cool that I did that. But I did that because my definition of what love was like shunning someone because I thought that would help them. That is incredibly dysfunctional and messed up. I didn't know better. Once you know better, you do better. And that's the metric of how we should judge people, right? But I think that there's a whole contingent of people that will never understand what it is like to love someone like your dad. Mm-hmm. You know, who he's your father. Like, you can't escape that he's your father. You didn't choose for him to be your father, and you have to live in your skin, and no one else can do that for you. So when people want to make it very simple on their internet gotcha, their little take, their comment, it's never going to encapsulate a whole lifetime living in these contradictions, and there are plenty of them.
Yeah, I can never describe to somebody just how much of a different world we lived in. And it really might be that, like, Dad harmed a lot of people, but he might have never had a chance to see outside of it.
Yeah. Again, intervention at 7 years old, if someone would have come in, what would the world be like? We don't have, that's not the timeline we're living on. We're living in the one we got, but it is something to think about. And again, there's so much pain and the stakes are so high around this. So it's impossible not to evoke so much strong feelings in anyone listening, right? Mormons are going to defend it ardently. Ex-Mormons are going to say it's not enough. People from the outside are going to think, whatever they think. Again, they're not the ones that have to live in these contradictions constantly. And I think a healthy life is an integrated life that can remember what it was like and have compassion for that. But also patience and tolerance. But also the anger is real too. Like when you're sitting there and you're being condescended upon by faithful Mormons who think that they're going to talk you into something that you don't know deep in your bones. It's incredibly, like, that's just the thing that I think about with faithful Mormons now. I'm like, guys, it's just bad manners. It's like embarrassing and you have bad manners and you don't even know that you're doing it. Like it sometimes I'm just embarrassed for them that their faithfulness comes out in such bad manners.
Yeah. The Mormons get under my skin. Oh God. But it's not that I don't have compassion for them. Are the Journals of Discourses, a lot of Mormons say these are unreliable transcripts of early Mormon. Can I quote the Journals of Discourses when I'm having an argument, or is that like not good information?
Well, I guess I would say it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to change hearts and minds, maybe not. But if your goal is to be historically accurate, you're well within the realm of safety. Journal of Discourses, it's tricky because there is a new transcription process happening with them. So the Journal of Discourses were transcribed in several ways. So how it would happen is Brigham Young and his leaders would travel to different wards and stakes all over the valley, and then someone would either follow them and transcribe them, usually Thomas Bullock or someone else. There are a handful of people that transcribed these. And so when you're listening to a sermon and you're writing it down, sometimes you're substituting words or you're not getting it fast enough. But these guys were really good at what they did. Thomas Bullock was excellent at what he did. And sometimes they wrote in shorthand. So LaJean Carruth is a faithful Latter-day Saint historian who is translating shorthand. She's very gifted. And her take is that Brigham Young is misunderstood because she's in his shorthand. She's read his stuff. I appreciate that she's bringing some nuance to the discussion, but I also think that the bulk of the Journal of Discourses are frontier violent doctrines, and you can't really get around that, even with the most generous. So the LDS will get away from those things because the Journal of Discourses are many, many talks over time written and contradictory doctrines. Sometimes Brigham will tell someone in Paris, Idaho, something he's not saying in Southern Utah, right? And it will contradict. Or he'll experiment with a doctrine here that doesn't square up with a doctrine here. And so LDS people have not canonized those things. And so then they think that they can eradicate that from their culture. I've seen quotes of John Taylor from Journal of Discourses on the vinyl in people's walls in their kitchens. Like, it has infiltrated the thinking and the doctrine because it was said officially over the pulpit by a prophet. It still counts and people still use it. And so for them to scapegoat that and say, oh, we don't believe in that. Show me where you don't believe in that. Just because it's not considered part of the standard works, they're going to argue that you can't use them. But I don't think that that's fair.
Were they originally published by the church?
Yeah.
They were published.
And they were sold at Deseret Book, the church's arm, for a long time. So
I was in there 2 years ago, and they were in there. There's a set of them in there.
I mean, and people still look to them for quotes. And I mean, it's an absurd deflection to get away from. And listen, I am all for LDS people moving away from the harmful frontier doctrines. We should be, but not this way. By denying that it didn't have an impact and that it hasn't impacted your culture of romanticizing the violent history into some beautiful, like, pioneer story, right? I don't know what to say other than that's the constant struggle. I don't think it will be resolved. But if you want to change hearts and minds of Mormons, they're going to, first of all, FLDS are going to outpace LDS people on scripture and doctrine all day. Like, do you want to win? You will cage match. I would never go in a cage match talking about scripture with you guys, because you had to memorize that stuff at a crazy level, right? Like, you had to hear this stuff all the time. Never going to get in a cage match with you guys. That's the first thing that you're dealing with. Every LDS person thinks that they're an expert in Mormon history and Mormon scripture because they hear about it every Sunday. It is not the same thing. And so you're already bumping up against that ego of like, they know all the answers at 10 years old to everything. And you're coming in and saying, well, what about this? And so that's the hard part. I think your biggest argument is your personal experience. They can't come at that. Yeah.
I'm not just trying to win LDS people. I have good conversations when it doesn't get into, when people are open, I have good conversations, but a lot of the men specifically are very, like, I'll have good conversations with some, but then some are like, no, you got to win on these arguments. And
Who are they if they can't be in charge? Who are they if they don't?
Yeah. I'm like,
what good is priesthood if you can't have authority over something?
Yeah. I'm kind of like, okay, I can win on those arguments.
Yeah.
Sure. Anyway, it's hard to talk to LDS men specifically.
Yeah. Solidarity, my friend. I definitely understand. I'm not, they're not my biggest fans.
So what about the Mormon? I watched American Primeval. What about the, what do you call it? The Mormon Massacre, the Mountain Meadows Massacre. So I still feel like Brigham Young didn't order it. What do you feel?
Well, just as a note of American Primeval, the depiction of the massacre is not historically accurate at all, right? And speaking of romanticizing, like when you're talking about fictionalized TV versus documentaries, it's a different craft. It's a different narrative. It wouldn't have been the way that I chose to tell it. I had to work within the scope of what they hired me to do,
right? Which
was to make sure the Nauvoo Legion looked accurate and their camps were on point. I'm very proud of that. There is a debate over this massacre that we talked about. 120-ish immigrants coming through southern Utah. Did Brigham Young order it? We will never be able to prove or disprove that. Whatever evidence, and it's very important to note that everybody involved lied. Everybody involved lied. They took blood oaths to cover it up and to lie. And what we do have proof, definitive proof, is that Brigham Young was part of an orchestrated plot to cover it up. We have evidence of that. So we can prove that he covered it up and protected leaders that were involved. That is not disputed. Did he order it? I don't know. Will Bagley, famous, not respected in the faithful Mormon community, but no one knew Overland Trail history like Will Bagley. He believes that Brigham Young did order it. And it kind of drove him mad to his death. Like, you could go to any historical event and this guy has read more documents than anyone I know. Like, he knows Overland Trail stuff like you wouldn't believe. And he would sometimes rant about it. Like, Brigham Young, nothing went on in this territory that he didn't know about. And I believe that to be true. I also believe that Brigham Young was really smart. And he was never going to put something like that pen to paper. My personal take is he probably was like, I'm going to create the conditions. And if it happens, it happens, because he did create the conditions. He preached blood atonement. He declared martial law. He wanted to punish outsiders. He definitely was using his law enforcement and his enforcers to go after and harass wagon trains. So did he mean for some of his most violent southern Utah men who he knew were capable of this violence, like John D. Lee, to do that? Who knows? But he sure as hell didn't try to stop it. I mean, we have this story of, Haslam, right, which was the writer, not reaching him in time. And then he was like, oh, shoot, we should have stopped it. I don't believe that that's true. But I think what happened was they thought they were going to maybe harass and get something, and it went wrong. And then when it went really wrong and they realized it wasn't Indians, it was Mormons coming after them, they had to cover it up. Brigham Young probably couldn't have accounted for that. But if someone had to be held responsible, I think he should have gone to jail over it. He was tried by the U.S. government years later and got off on it. But yeah, I mean, he definitely wasn't innocent. Yeah. But I don't think you could say that he ordered it directly, no.
Yeah, I have such a problem with Brigham Young because he was so decisive in his leadership. And I genuinely believe that without Brigham Young, Mormonism wouldn't be anything what it is today. And that's why I don't like how they try to put aside so many of his sermons and his works. That's why I think Brigham Young against the church today is such a good resource when you're arguing. But I'm not saying he did right. I'm just saying I feel like the modern church really, they hate Brigham Young, but they exist because of Brigham Young. It's kind of the same with Joseph Smith, but Joseph Smith's almost easier to deal with.
Oh, for sure. And part of it is we just have so much better documentation of Brigham Young. I mean, I always thought this was weird about your dad too. Why did they bring scribes everywhere to, like, your dad scribed everything, like bad things, criminal things. And Joseph sometimes did and Brigham did too. And it's like, guys, why did you write that down? I have to believe that there was a part of them that really believed that they had a righteous cause, like that they really believed in what they were doing. So, but I think that that's the wild part about Mormons, that we do have so much documentation on our dirty laundry. And part of it is Brigham Young didn't think that he was doing wrong. Now, again, he could have ordered the massacre directly. They thought that they were at war. They definitely believed in the ends of time, end of days. Brigham Young definitely had a lot of really violent rhetoric. He was going to take over the government and all this kind of stuff. It's possible. I think that would have been a huge strategic tactical error, as it ended up being. So it seems like a huge risk, but I think there's a part of him that just didn't care. He wanted some blood. And another thing we got to look at these early leaders is most of the early leaders of the church were men who came from very violent frontier upbringings. A lot of them had fought in the original Black Hawk War, worked in the silver mines, man camps. We're talking lots of alcohol abuse, lots of sex and prostitution and violence and assault and all those kinds of things. And then we put them in power and they're supposed to tell us about a kind God? I don't think so, right? Like, they don't know kindness if it bit them in the face. And so we should be lucky that Brigham Young's sermons weren't worse. Because, I mean, Brigham Young was a lot more pampered than, say, like John D. Lee. John D. Lee had a very violent upbringing. And that violence is expressed a lot. But Brigham Young's henchmen, Hosea Stout, chief of police, violent upbringing. Bill Hickman, violent upbringing. Porter Rockwell, we know very little about his childhood, which I think is not by accident. And so these were guys who were deeply traumatized. And then, expecting them to react in sort of a stable, healthy leadership way when the government comes, I don't think so.
Did John D. Lee get shot?
Oh, man. You know what? The very first time I heard of this theory of him not being shot was from FLDS.
Really?
I didn't know it was a thing. Well, because you guys are around the Johnsons, right? Like, and so let me tell your listeners, tell me if I'm getting this wrong. So John D. Lee, he was one of the organizers of the massacre. He's one of the guys that decided when things go wrong, we're going to kill all these innocent people. He is the only man that's ever held accountable. He's scapegoated by the church. Brigham Young throws him under the bus and he's executed by firing squad in 1877. Falls back into his coffin and he's buried. Then I hear from some FLDS, they're like, no, he never died. He wore a steel plate and Benjamin F. Johnson's kids took him to the ranch in Arizona and he lived out his days. And I was like, what? I've never heard that. That's such a great story. I don't think it's true. If anyone has any evidence from your community, like anything, like journals, anything, I would love to see it. Love the story, but I think it's been a while since I've been in that history, but John D. Lee's wife, one of his wives and one of his sons escorted the body back and buried it. It's possible. I don't think so. What do you think?
I've heard it since I was little.
I know.
It's like a common knowledge in the FLDS.
We need to compare lore sometime because, like, your stories are like Gaddy Aunt and robbers up in the hills and stuff. and like your John Taylor Temple stories. And it's so cool. Like, that's why I say like FLDS is boring, but actually you have some of these fun stories that we never heard. And I think it's also a Southern Utah thing. It's not just FLDS, but yeah, what a great story that he like got out of that and like survived somehow. I
think the way the FLDS view it is Brigham Young's way of dealing with it was to throw John D. Lee under the bus, but not actually kill him.
Yeah, I mean, it's a compelling conspiracy, and I get it. And all day today, we've been talking about like what the history actually says versus what we think, you know, and those are two different things, and we should be responsible about them, especially when I'm talking from a historical perspective. Right now, current scientific history goes with documentary history, which is very limited, but people get really orthodox. And what that means is we only can validate what the documents say. Now, think about the limitations of that. Documents can say whatever they want. People can write down whatever they want. Doesn't mean it's true. And yeah, I was talking to you earlier, like, I don't think ChatGPT is a reliable thing with Mormon history because it only tells an aggregate narrative. It doesn't get into the history. Even that written down is not completely accurate because you've got sources that are still not digitized to train the models. So it's interesting that like we've become so religious about documents, but speaking from a historical perspective, that's the best we can do. So as far as documentary evidence of John D. Lee, there's absolutely no evidence for that. Yeah. But I do love the stories. And, you know, I love the whole like Billy the Kid lore that like maybe he didn't die and Pat Garrett and he didn't shoot him, you know, and like it gives that archetype of like the mystery of the West. I could see the story for John D. Lee. And like I said, I would love the Johnson family in particular. If you have proof or someone who said that like John D. Lee got taken back to our family, we raised him, and I, you know, ate porridge with him once. Like, I would love to see that. But I just haven't seen any documents. I've just only heard tell. Yeah. But it's a great story.
What about the history of the church that Joseph, does the church still support that and publish it?
Yeah.
Like the seven or 8 volumes of the history of the church?
Yeah, they do. And it's still used. And it's used in Sunday school. And
for Joseph Smith's history?
Yeah, but you guys are working within... So they do edit them. And so this is, speaking of conspiracies, it's caused a problem within my community. So Brigham Young got Lucy Mack's history. She was writing one with Martha Corey Smith, who was dictating her history of the church. Brigham Young didn't like it, and he did edit it to fit his narrative, right? So the church has done that. They have edited the history of the church to fit the sort of modern narrative that they are shaping. They're absolutely doing that. But what that has caused is a conspiracy within the LDS church that is really taken off, that Joseph Smith never practiced polygamy. He was like this pure, like unadulterated guy who like just misunderstood. And Brigham Young reinvented it. Like, he was the corrupt pervert and he brought it in. And so we can still trust everything Joseph said. But like William Clayton, who was Joseph Smith's scribe, he was forging his diaries and he was changing it. Like it's just like dangerous territory. And it's been really frustrating because Joseph Smith did actively try to hide his polygamy. So he like gave conspiracy theorists like a bone, right? Because he was hiding it. And so it's become a huge movement. You know, the internet scales everything, and it's scaled these conspiracies too. So that's something that we're dealing with in the Mormon historical community.
What do you think about it? Did Joseph Smith live polygamy?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. I mean, here's what I always try to say.
However many podcasts about all his wives.
I mean, so people will use that. The people that have been the meanest to me, honestly, are the polygamy deniers, because they're like, I mean, I won't even get into their criticisms. It's fascinating. But their take is that I am so invested in my career in Joseph Smith having polygamy, and ergo, you can't, believe anything I say. My career is not invested in Joseph Smith being a polygamist. And first of all, my whole life was invested in him not being a polygamist, by the way. I lost everything for uncovering this stuff and like synthesizing and putting it together. But over time, the polygamy wasn't the only thing emerging about Joseph Smith's character. Once I realized how he was utilizing and abusing government power, I mean, in Nauvoo, come on. He was the chief justice. He was the mayor of Nauvoo. He was the chancellor of the university. He ran the Nauvoo Legion. He was running for president. He was the president of the church. Do you know what happens?
Ran the newspaper.
If you get in trouble? Do you know who the chief justice answers to? They answer to the mayor. Guess who was the mayor? Joseph Smith. Guess who was the chief justice? Joseph Smith. Like, come on, you guys. Like, and they were counterfeiting. They were having secret hits on their enemies. They were raiding and stealing. This is not conspiracy. Joseph Smith was not a pious pilgrim. He was a frontier rough and tumble, kind of a gangster sometimes. And so if you want to take polygamy off the table and think that he was sexually on the up and up, okay. First of all, let's go back to his youth, where he's admitting Grant Palmer's research you can look into. Grant Palmer alleges that Joseph Smith was visiting prostitutes at an early age. If you were a boy on the frontier, you probably were. That was not unique. There are many reports of Joseph Smith. I would say many. There are 5 or 6 that we have. Sarah Pratt says that a famous steamboat madam was like really knew Joseph Smith. They were good friends. Emma Smith's best friend, I think it was a year or 2 into their marriage, Emma there's an account of her going to a neighbor because Joseph was hitting on her best friend. He was when he was on treasure digs, he was accused of impropriety with the Stoll sisters. Like, how far back do we want to go? Fanny Alger, was it a dirty, nasty affair? Was it a plural wife? She was 16 and he was her boss. So either way, it's not on the up and up. Like, I don't know how we do this or why we do this, but I think we need to, a faith crisis is so hard, right? Having your worldview be shifted. Not only is it so disorienting, but it comes at your ego. Like, am I stupid? How did I not see this? Could I be this wrong? And I think that there are a contingent of people that cannot deal with the level of distortion that they grew up in. And so they need to hold on to something. And I get it. I've clawed at all kinds of stupid stuff and I've come a long way. And if you met me 10 years ago, I was a mess. Like, I'm still a mess, but like, I understand why you try to do that. And so I think that they're trying to claim something for themselves and keep it to have some sort of steadiness. And I just think you're building it on a house of sand, my friends. Like, if you're doing it to argue some morality in Joseph Smith, that is barking up a very wrong tree. But they're doing it.
And their whole thing is that Brigham Young killed Joseph Smith.
Killed Joseph, or sought to take power, in which he did seek to take power. The way that Brigham Young got power from Joseph Smith, very clever. We'll give him props for that. Like, that was a divine orchestration, but without the divinity. But yeah, he killed him. He perverted it. They changed documents, and Brigham Young did change documents. And
convinced all his wives to say different things, or convinced all those women to say they were married to Joseph.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Come on.
Exactly.
Come on.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because later on, as polygamy is contested in the courts, and as we get towards the 20th century, Joseph F. Smith and Joseph Smith Jr.'s son comes to Utah, and they collect all these affidavits. And so you get these later accounts of women saying, I was married to Joseph, I slept in his bed, all this kind of stuff. And so the argument is those are so much later, so we can't, we can't take them seriously because they weren't contemporary. And it's like, okay, if we're going to play that rule, that game, then you can't take a lot of the stuff that we have from Joseph Smith seriously. Like William Clayton's journals are contested right now. That's the big hot one. They're saying that they're forged and changed. And it's like, okay, well then you can't trust William Clayton's sources at all, which takes away most of what you know about Joseph Smith. Like, it doesn't work that way, you guys. It's a fun conspiracy in the same way John D. Lee being skirted away is a fun conspiracy. Okay. It speaks to something that you're like, well, that makes sense. That's what I would have done. That's, but I think it's preventing people from addressing the truth, which was that Joseph Smith was not an honest man when it came to power, especially sexual power. And if he wasn't abusing a network of women, which he absolutely was. But if he wasn't, we still have plenty of evidences where he used that sort of coercion and control and humiliation with the people around him.
The FLDS believe that Joseph F. Smith suffered a kind of blood atonement.
Oh, really? I don't think I've heard this.
Because he was loyal to John W. Woolley, but he was the president of the church. And the other apostles were threatening him if he didn't sign the Second Manifesto and get rid of polygamy totally out of the church. They were threatening him. So John W. Woolley basically said, sign it. But as a consequence, you're going to have to basically have kind of a bad death.
I didn't know this. This is a story. I haven't heard this.
I just heard it from my dad, but I don't know how reliable it is.
That's the thing. Your dad was good at making up stuff too. Who knows? I mean, the one thing I was thinking of, that's a great story. We should talk more about that later. I would love to hear more about it, actually, because I'm trying to remember. I think Joseph F. Smith just died of like old age, or I can't remember. I can't recall it off the top of my head.
No, it comes from grandfather. And
really?
Yeah, not just dad.
The one that I've heard from you guys that I would love more information on is that Rulin claimed in a priesthood meeting that he was called by J. Reuben Clark to disrupt the priesthood, to come and basically form a false church with the FLDS. Yeah, have you heard that story?
I've heard it. I actually think it's I was even writing a novel about it.
Really?
Yeah, because it's such a good story.
It's such a good story.
Because if you think about it, I think it's too genius that it probably didn't happen. But the only way that Reuben Jeffs got high in the FLDS was because of the way his wife was taken away. Mm-hmm. And if the church orchestrated that in a way that, because they want Reuben to go and infiltrate and take over and ruin the FLDS, if they managed to understand that the most important thing to get him to be an apostle was to take Zola, who was his wife in the LDS church, and basically make a big deal. Because
she was the daughter of a very powerful LDS leader. So that's the context for your listeners. That Rulin was married to Hugh B. Brown's daughter, Zola. And so he was on track to be important in the LDS church. So that gave him a lot of credibility in the fundamentalist community.
Yeah. And so I think, in my view, if the church really did that, then they on purposely made the divorce between Reuben Jeffs and Zola a big deal, so that the fundamentalist leaders would basically help Reuben Jeffs through it, give him wives, and ordain him an apostle.
I think that's true, though. I mean, that did happen. It did give him a lot of credibility.
It did.
Yeah.
I don't think he would have been an apostle if...
The question is if J. Reuben Clark, that's another conspiracy. Like, that guy was getting people to spy on each other. Like, he was using CIA sort of tactics at the time. FBI, he got the FBI involved to bust fundamentalists. If he did call Rulin to deliberately start a fake church, I don't think that happened at all. But if it did, it's a great story. The thing I will say is, like all conspiracies, like with Joseph Smith and, letting people off the hook with him being a bad guy, I think it helps FLDS people make sense of like, what the hell happened? It's like, that's a convenient story of like maybe, or I always hear like Rulin had it right, Uncle Roy had it right, but then the Jeffs ruined it all. So that's like a convenient way to be like, see, we always had the truth. We can still hold on to that. We can hold on to Uncle Roy's stuff, but Reuben Jeffs was corrupt from the start.
Okay, but another thing that is funny that kind of supports the story is the 1953 raid and all those persecutions that the Mormon church was helping bring on the polygamists. They were actively involved in suppressing the fundamentalists. That all stopped just a couple of years after Reuben Jeffs was part of the
join
the fundamentalists as an apostle. Like all that stops.
Okay, that's a good. I mean, I would read your novel, man. I really would. Like I again, being confronted with these conspiracies as an LDS person, I think there's still a part of me that's self-protecting. I was like, never. Like our guy, never. You know, what do I care about J. Reuben Clark? But yeah, I think it's interesting, and I'm glad you're talking about it. I think you should talk about it more. LDS historians should confront these things, and they should look into it, because stranger things have happened too. Like I used to be so against conspiracy. Again, when I left the church, I became very atheistic. There was no magic or animation to the world at all. And that was such a great way to live life. And then, you know, I've kind of had my ass kicked with this Jeffrey Epstein stuff to be like, oh, a lot of the stuff I thought was crazy conspiracy was actually happening. What? Like, so who knows? I don't know what the church did. I know it was a very murky time, you know, during the rise of fundamentalism and ruling. And so it could have happened. But we need the documents to be able to say that it did.
And I guess the other reason a lot of FLDS that are still wanting to be FLDS, they leave out the Jeffs. They kind of just do their own thing now. They view Warren Jeffs. If you look at Warren Jeffs from the time he took over, only from the standpoint that he's just trying to destroy the mindset in the church so that nobody else can take over, then he's done almost the perfect thing. At the sacrifice of himself, that's some serious dedication.
Yeah.
But
it's a very big long con, yeah.
You know, that's a 70-year mission carried out by Ruthin and Warren Jeffs if that happened. But so that's why I just don't believe it. But
yes, I think I would agree with you on that. But it's compelling, but I also do think that it is widely believed because, like I said, it gets people off the hook to be like, oh, that's what happened. I mean, what happened to the FLDS is a crazy story. It is. And yet it is Mormonism taken to its logical conclusion in so many ways. And so it's like probably inevitable. So if not your dad, who else would have stepped in to fill the vacuum? And now that your dad's in prison, as we've seen, like everyone thinks about Sam Bateman because that's the most recent. He's not the only one. There's guys stepping up all the time. Troublesome people.
Yeah, he was stupid. That's the only reason. Like, those kind of things can go on for a long time. He was just really stupid. I think that a lot of like I was saying before, Warren Jeffs was supported by a whole group of people. And those people, they don't just leave.
Yeah.
They say, how are we wrong? What happened? It's gone so bad. And then they say, oh, it was the Jeffs. This whole conspiracy happened with the Mormon church and the Jeffs coming in to ruin it all. Now we've got to group back together and like keep this thing going. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
It's our inability to confront what's in front of our face. Like I said, like the polygamy deniers, the same thing. If they allow that Joseph Smith, if they spent less energy trying to fight what the documents do say, what the history does say, and of course there's gaps and of course there's holes and it's a controversial history. But if Occam's razor did the easiest thing, Joseph Smith was a polygamist. Oh no, like now you have to confront the thing that like maybe it's all a lie. And people don't want to do that. And I get it. I started a whole podcast to try to fight it, you know, and you hear me actively lose my faith in real time. But it's hard because, like I said, it's hard to get off that cruise ship and get in a little raft by yourself, especially when you don't want to. And Mormonism does work for a lot of people, even if it keeps them stagnant, you know, and to leave that behind is sometimes too great. And so we need to give ourselves better stories to sleep at night.
What do you think about the Adam God doctrine?
In what way? Like,
is it valid? Is it Joseph Smith's and Brigham Young's, is it their teaching? The church abandons it, right?
Sure.
The church does not believe in the Adam God doctrine. What is so bad about it? Why does the church... Is it because the other Christian churches that the church is so against it? Was Joseph Smith for the Adam God doctrine?
Well, so...
And maybe we tell people. So
Adam God... Yeah, go ahead. You explain what it is.
Yeah, so the LDS church right now believes that, like, Elohim is the father of Jesus Christ. And the FLDS also believes that. The the Adam God doctrine says that Adam came to this earth and started the population on this earth. And that's how the earth even started getting humans. The LDS people, I don't know what they believe or how they for sure look at it, but they don't believe that Adam was the father of the people on this earth, right?
Yeah.
They believe Elohim is. The FLDS believe Adam was. They also believe that Adam is just the person that started the God that started the population of the earth.
So Brigham Young taught that Adam, the first man on earth in the Bible, and God were the same person. That God came down in a human form and procreated, had children with Eve, who was the mother of this earth. And it's really a polygamous doctrine because it's arguing that Eve is, so let me back up. So when you die in Mormonism, if you are righteous and you are a man, you get to become a god, like our God. Our God, we believe, was a human once, went through all these experiences, and then he elevated and became a god and created his own planets and his own worlds. Eve is the mother of this earth and his wife of this earth. But God, because he's a polygamous Mormon God and he's done right, he has many wives. And so for each wife, there's a planet, and she gets to be the Eve of that planet. So he'll go down and be Adam and procreate with that Eve on that planet. That's kind of the Adam God doctrine, right? Like that Adam and God are the same people. So Brigham Young started experimenting with this. So did some of his prophets and counselors like Jedediah Grant, especially in the Mormon Reformation. This comes up. Tracing it back to Joseph Smith, people like your father have tried to extrapolate, and you can take elements of it because they were talking about in Nauvoo, is Jesus a polygamist? Did Jesus have multiple wives? Those kind of things. And so you can see where Brigham Young might have gotten some of those. And Brigham, like your father, was always very concerned in the lineage of his teachings. Like, I got it from this prophet, and this is why it's credible. Because they can't just invent it, even though they're a prophet. They're supposed to like pull from, like, Joseph revealed it to me in a dream, whatever provenance they get for their doctrine. I would place Adam God squarely as a Brigham Young doctrine. He tries it out, doesn't go well. He gets an Orson Pratt. I get the Orsons confused sometimes.
Orson Hyde and Orson Pratt.
Yeah, and yeah.
Orson Hyde's like probably a little bit more eloquent, right?
I think one of the Orsons gets in a fight with him over this and almost gets in trouble. I think it's Hyde. So anyway, because Orson Pratt was into his own crazy doctrines too. I think Orson Hyde has a conflict with this. It starts to become a problem because people start wondering, like, and getting concerned with, well, do I get a planet? How many planets? How many wives? That kind of thing. And so it falls out of favor just because the logistics of that doctrine taken to its logical conclusion as it's applied with Mormonism it doesn't work. But fundamentalists just kept it. So you said that the church doesn't or abandon it. They abandon it, but they've never really gotten away from it. So one of the things that ex-Mormons in my community are mad about is the church hides documents, right? Like they've gotten rid of any Adam God stuff. They've scrubbed that from the archives. I don't think it was to lie necessarily. I think it was to stop people from going to fundamentalism. Because once you start getting into those doctrines and you're like, wait, Brigham Young said what? That's really interesting. And that actually makes sense. But it also argues for polygamy. So if that doctrine is true and a prophet that I believe is true said it, then maybe polygamy is true. And the LDS Church does not want that. So I think they're less concerned about hiding the truth from outsiders as they are concerned about people going to fundamentalism once they find these old documents, like your dad did.
Yeah, my view of the Adam God doctrine is that Mormonism doesn't really work without it. Like, I don't really see Mormonism separate from the Adam God. Like, to me, you kind of have to have it. I don't know. And
it is a very logical Brighamite polygamy doctrine, for sure.
But it does kind of come from Joseph Smith's teachings.
Tell me
like
the origin.
Joseph Smith's late teachings in Nauvoo is kind of where it starts.
Do you know where? Do you know what he said? Or
yeah, I think a big part of it, like a lot of Dad's teachings about it are pulled from the King Follett Discourse.
Okay.
About Joseph
Multiple
Smith talks about gods and stuff. Yeah. I think a lot of people don't realize how kind of ironed out it is in the fundamentalist community. Like, it's very well understood. Dad's father, Rulin, was super into that. And so he really preached a lot on it. It's
logical if you accept polygamy. If you don't, that's where you run into problems. And so that's why the LDS Church, like, it's a polygamous doctrine.
Okay. That makes sense.
And especially because, like, you guys have the, like, 3-5-7 rule too. Like, so in Mormon heaven, we have 3 kingdoms of glory, really. Everyone dies and everyone gets shuffled into a kingdom. And the top one for the good, righteous Mormons is the celestial kingdom. But even within that kingdom, and this is getting into Adam God, you have 3 kingdoms.
Yes.
And depending on how many wives you have, gets you into the highest, right? 3, 5, 7. And so that goes into a higher thing. And it's incompatible with modern Mormonism because, like, we don't practice polygamy anymore.
Okay. The thing about having 3 wives, Mormons, I don't know where this comes from because I haven't been able to find the early doctrine. It was just a thing in the FLDS. Like, same.
We've tried to actually look for the origins. William Clayton kind of talks about numbers. At one point, Joseph Smith tells William Clayton, like, you can't have 2 sisters, because William wants to marry the same people that Joseph Smith wants to marry. So Joseph Smith comes up with it. He's like, you can only have 2 that are sisters. Like, no more. Wow. Yeah. Like,
my dad broke that one.
Yeah, of course. your dad broke a lot of things, but yeah. So as far as I can tell, and any of your listeners, if you guys have, again, documents help us in Mormon history. If we can have a document of someone said this, or they heard that they said that helps us. But when I first heard 357, I was like, what is that? It is very fundamentalist, very polygamy oriented. And 357, Mormons are not traditional numerologists, but those numbers have significance in Mormonism. And so I think that that's interesting. People say that Joseph Smith taught it. I just don't know that we can prove it.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Like, to do certain ordinances, you always have to have 3 men. Dad, he always organized his wives in, like, when they're doing their prayer or whatever deals, either 7 or 12. The apostles are always 12, or there has to be 7 apostles there to make a decision, but to be a complete quorum, there has to be 12 apostles.
And you know what, that's so interesting. When you look at Joseph Smith, he was so into the early occult, and numerology did matter. Those numbers had mystical meanings. The Council of 9, right? Like, in fact, this is a funny aside, but I know Mormons now who love the Council of 9 in the endowment, because in alien lore, there's supposed to be a Council of 9 people in the New World Order that know about all the aliens. Like, those numbers trace back to the occult. And so it's interesting that your dad was taking the numbers without the occult symbolism. They had now been, like, stripped down to, like, this Mormon meaning. But in a way, it's still the occult, right? Joseph Smith was using numbers according to occult magic and numerology. And then later on, 200 years later, your dad is still using numbers. The meanings change, and but they still have the same significance, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's very difficult for me to tell the level of evil intent that my dad had, because I know he was very versed on all the anti-Mormon literature, even everything about Joseph Smith's early life that he could get his hands on, he read. And so I can't tell if he was doing it on purpose or not. I just can't tell.
Yeah. Well, it's probably a mix of all of it, like we talked about. People want to know all the time if I think that Joseph Smith believed it, or if I think the current LDS prophet believes it. And it's just like, belief is one component. Like, you have this whole culture around you, and you have incentives around you. And the incentives for Joseph were different than the incentives that your dad had, but sometimes they were the same. So it's hard. I mean, it's hard to tell what was sincere and what was made up, and what was shame-based and what was shadow-based. Like, I don't know.
So do you ever go to Mormon church?
Just when I'm supporting my family members, but not really. I got better things to do with my time on Sunday, like spending Father's Day with you.
Yes. I would feel, I don't know, threatened if I walked into Mormon church.
Yeah.
I'm out there saying all this bullshit about them.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, I've had to grow really thick skin because the work that I do comes at people's hairpin triggers, you know? People said all kinds of things about me. And every once in a while I'll get defensive. I'm like, why would you say that's not even rooted in truth? I'm so obsessed with like the document and the evidence. And so when people say things about me that are just like extrapolated or made up, or I'll say something on a Facebook post that they'll like piece together with patchwork that I did. And I'm just like, there's no proof for that. I've had to realize that like, we all do it, right? I do it with Brigham Young. We need to blame other people for our feelings. And so when Mormons feel defensive because I say something on the internet that disagrees with their world choices, they feel judged by that. And I understand that. But I'm coming to this from a very personal exploration. And I've given my life to the study of it. So even if I confuse the Orsons sometimes, I mean, I have 200 years of tradition in my head, including 400 plus break-off groups. So, it's always the facts are all in there. My recall is not always what I wish it could be. But I've accepted that's what it is. It used to hurt my feelings because belonging to the church meant so much to me. But now, like, the only thing I try to do is show I'm not here to be your enemy, man. Like, I just want the best information possible. And I always try to separate my opinion from fact, but I know it's something people are taught to live and die on. And so they're going to be really spicy about it.
Past Mormonism, it's hard for a Mormon to see joy, but we talk about healing and we talk about, continuing the boredom past Mormonism. But, like, I hate Sundays sometimes because whether you're in Mormonism or out of them, I don't know. It's just something's wrong. Okay. Well, what do you think? Like, when you're a Mormon and you look out and you see all the stuff happening, that might give you a cold feeling or whatever. The healing talk might give you a cold feeling. Like, what is there exciting past Mormonism? Like, genuinely interesting and I don't know. Like, you can't go join some other crazy thing.
Oh, plenty of people do.
You can.
Plenty of people do. I would advise against it. But.
Yeah. But like, what is exciting outside? Like,
well, I think you have to get real comfortable with not knowing the answers to things. And humans don't like that, right? We want safety. And again, that's the structure that Mormonism gives people. It's a stabilizing factor in that. And to lose that is real. And it doesn't mean it's not good to lose that. But, I did have to go through a lot of anger, and anger masks grief, right? Anger is an emotion that is just holding the grief. And once the anger goes away, then you have to deal with the grief. And I still grieve sometimes. Like, the dream that it gave me was so beautiful. The idea of having this beautiful, happy family and just living and serving people, that seemed like a really good dream.
Being the mom of a world.
Well,
come on. Look at what you missed out on.
I did grow up in a generation where they're like, we don't know that we teach that. And I'm like, what? We don't get planets now? Jeez. Like, no, but the world is... The exciting thing is life gets to be what you make it and you get to decide. And as long as we keep allowing other people to do that for us, then you're going to get into trouble. But if you can really get good, and it's going to be messy and you're going to mess up and you're going to make mistakes. And because you come from a community that has a lot of dysfunction and really bad boundaries, like I will say, Mormons, when they leave the church, their boundaries are bad. My boundaries were bad. Like, I just didn't We all trauma bond with each other when we leave the church. We don't know how to develop real friendships outside of the church. And so people trauma bond, and then you get stuck with unhealthy people. Allow for the messiness, allow for the anger. You were not allowed your anger in the church, so it's going to take some time for it to burn away. And I think it's Maya Angelou. We brought her up earlier. She says, like, you know, what does she say? Like, bitterness is a cancer, but anger can burn it away. And I think the anger does burn it away. But when the anger goes, then you're left with the grief. And that's the hard part. And that's what your life is protecting you from, because it's okay to be sad that you gave so many years to something, or that you behaved badly, or that people behaved badly towards you. That the sad thing is, this tradition does create so many victims, and that creates a lot of complexity, and a lot of the victims want to steal the power that was stolen from them, right? Ends justify the means. I can hurt other people because it hurt me. Don't do that. God, don't do that. Transmute it. Turn it to art, turn it to story, turn it to something, but don't steal power. Find a different way to get power. But then some people don't want to deal with the humiliation of being a victim. And I've met a lot of folks, especially FLDS men, that are like, I don't want to be a victim. And I get that, because you cannot live as a victim the rest of your life. But you have to acknowledge at some point that you were victimized and deal with the grief and the pain of that, and then move on from that. And that's a really hard one, especially men who grew up with so much entitlement around power and authority, to think that they were victimized. But you can't stay there either. There's nothing there for you to stay in romanticizing victimhood, right? But that's different for everyone, and it's not prescriptive, and only you can decide when you're healed from that. So outside of Mormonism, there's a ton of work. There's a ton of healing. You come out malformed and dysfunctional with bad manners and bad boundaries. And so I think you have a responsibility to do the work, get the therapy, get the treatment, do whatever it is to make yourself not a danger to those around you. And when I say danger, I'm not talking about your dad level danger, although we do know a lot of narcissists that are created in this community and entitlement. But just like your pain can be dangerous and messy. I look at the ways that I hurt other people when I was coming out of this messy experience, that it wasn't okay, you know? And I didn't mean to, but a lot of people don't mean to hurt other people when they're in pain. And so you have a responsibility to healing. And then outside of that, I think the best thing you have outside of Mormonism is curiosity, uncontained.
Yeah.
You can explore whatever you want. You can think about whatever you want. You can read whatever you want. You can go down whatever rabbit hole, whatever you want. No cults. That's my rule. Like, don't get too organized about it. I have returned to a sort of mysticism and belief in spirituality after many years, but my rule is don't get too organized about it. I don't follow gurus. I liked good advice from people, but I think sex and religion are similar. They deserve consent. And when someone is like putting it onto you with like someone's preaching at you, bad manners. I did not consent for your religion to be placed upon me. And so I think that you have to make sure that because you've been primed as a Mormon to follow a leader. It's so ingrained in you, you don't know. So just because you hear a good idea and you miss the community, don't get too organized, don't get too orthodox, don't get too attached to certitude. This world is a mystery. And if you approach it with an excitement and a curiosity and a wonder about the beauty and the mystery of it, life is going to be so much better. And so for me, that's what I do. To me, it's a big, crazy game. And I'm going to play it every day and decide, and not take it so seriously. Because in Mormonism, it was so serious that it got stripped of any color. And I think if you just stop taking it so seriously, and when the hits come, you roll with it. And when the good comes, you roll with that too. But I think it's the curiosity that's the gift.
I agree. But sometimes when you grow up in that, it is a trip coming out of it.
Oh man.
God. Like,
I can't even imagine.
To the point where you can't tell if you're real or you're going to die. Or, I don't know. It's a trip.
I mean, I cannot imagine the level that you've gone through, because mine was very difficult. And it's still, like I said, sometimes it'll sneak up on me and I'm like, damn, I'm still very Mormon in my thinking about that, to my detriment. I can't imagine what you've gone through. So kudos to you. In some ways, I know that this is, your dad used to say your family was special and you guys were special. You guys did go through a very exclusive experience. And so, I wonder what you'll be able to transmute that into. Like that is an opportunity in some ways to really, like, my experience was concentrated, but yours was like extra concentrated. Yours is like the essential oils of worldview. So we'll see what it does. But like what you're doing with the podcast, you're transmuting it. You could go out there with your dad's entitlement and hurt other people. You could do that. People would understand why that happened. But that's not what you're doing. You're trying to educate. You're trying to go a different route. And I think that's the way, is to take that pain and move the energy into something that doesn't hurt.
Yeah. That's why I don't really believe in God anymore, is because like everything's unfair.
Yeah.
Fucking deal with it.
Yeah. I mean, everything's unfair, but also that's good news, right?
Yeah.
Like if you hit the rock bottom, it's all up from here. Like there's, everything's unfair, but everything's, I think a better way to reframe it, a less nihilistic way for me, would be there's no meaning to anything. We get to make the meaning. You get to make the meaning. Meaning was made for you your whole life on everything. Now it's your decision. And you get to decide what that is. And so you can, put a meaning on it that's the least charitable for your good, or you can find a meaning that moves you forward. And I've had to fight for my own mental health to find meanings that move me forward and not get me stuck in the unfairness of it. But I also don't blame you for being in a place right now where you've only been out 3 years.
Yeah, 3 to 4.
Yeah, give yourself some gentleness and some credit. Like you were placed on this earth in a hard situation. And you're still here and you're still with us and you're still trying to find your way through it. And I think that life will probably get better. You can't go back to that. Can't go back to that. It's a
trip though, because sometimes I'm dealing with, I have some, my brothers and sisters are awesome, but some of them, I see them doing things and talking, and I'm like, God, you're like, I'll see them do the most sexist thing ever. And I'm like, oh God, you're still in the FLDS, bro. I don't know what to tell you, but you're still in the fucking FLDS. People have, it's way harder to leave all that. Even when you think you left, you probably haven't.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's what I said. It still creeps up on me. Like, but the fact that you have an awareness that you want to unpack those things, I think that's the difference, because I have met them. They're rare, but there are people that aren't interested in looking at themselves. You know what I mean? And, don't have a problem. Like, they like the misogyny that Mormonism gave them. That makes them feel powerful in this world. And it's like, okay, you're not someone I can be in community with, right?
Yeah.
It's harder when it's your family.
Sometimes I drive past them. Oh, one of the things that bothers me the worst is seeing those groups of Mormon moms. I don't know why. I don't know if it's like something to do with dad's wives, like these Mormon moms who are like, kind of, they feel higher class than everybody. I think it must be something to do with dad's moms, because that's how dad's family kind of was. But these Mormon moms, they just get on my nerves. I see them with like a couple kids, and they're all dressed the same way, and they're in their own little cult, whatever it is. I'm like, God, I just want to like, I don't know.
I think it's good news. It points to something. For me, when I have those, and I call them triggers, I know that word is overused, but when someone else brings something up in us of anger, that's telling us that there's something out of place with our definition of the world, right? And so,
sure.
So the more that you can unpack that, the better. Like, anger is a very useful emotion that way, and we weren't allowed it before. So like, indulge yourself in that, and then get curious about it after, and be like, why does that bother me so much? What is it that I think about the world that? And you're going to have to do that with everything though, because that's what it takes. And unfortunately, I don't think it's an easy road. And yet you didn't choose it, and here you are. And what a crazy life you got placed in.
Yeah. Well, I got one last question for you. Do you see yourself in 10 years still doing Mormon history? What do you think about the Mormon history space? Are you confident that we're on the right track pretty soon, or are there going to be way too many people believing in the bunch of bullshit like Brigham Young's conspiracy theories? So yeah, how do you see all that?
It's a great question. I mean, I do a lot now in my work outside of Mormon stuff, but it's Mormon adjacent, right? So I do a lot of film work, and I still do a lot of Mormon film work and consulting, but a lot of writing and a lot of stuff in Western history. Because to be honest with you, it got really dark. And, you know, especially when I never meant to get into FLDS stuff. I got sort of pulled into it from folks in the community that needed help. And because I didn't have better boundaries around it, I just like tried to help everybody and do all the things. It was very Mormon lady in me. Like, I can help everyone. I can't say no. I need to help everybody. And it just got overwhelming, and it got dark. And I walked a hard few very dark years where, you know, being in Mormon trauma and hearing about people's worst moments over and over, it was hard to go to sleep at night. It was hard to wake up in the morning. And I couldn't do that anymore. So I've had to sort of set boundaries around it. But I think because of my expertise, it will always be with me somehow. And so I'm trying to find ways to do it in ways that don't destroy my person, right? And, you know, I'm mostly off of social media just because, like I said, I make everybody mad for whatever reason. And you just get tired of people making up stuff. And you're like, again, a truth teller, you're like, I want to prove that's not true. Like, why would you say that? The internet is mean, and ex-Mormons and Mormons are deeply traumatized. And a lot of them have, you know, unchecked mental health problems they need to work out. I don't need them to work it out on me. So all of that stuff, I don't want to have anything to do with these days. But my work is consistently putting me in the public more and more. And so I'm just having to learn how to set boundaries with that. And so I don't know. I don't know where 10 years will bring me. I will say that I have vast interests outside of Mormonism. I'm very interested in like science and physics and, esoteric stuff. And
what's that?
Esoteric stuff? Like, I love mysticism now. I love it historically. The occult, magic, tarot, spiritualism.
Oh, I'm scared. Oh.
Witchcraft. I love that stuff. I love it as a historical study, but I also like practicing it myself, just for myself. I don't believe in organized stuff. Don't need to be scared. It's all up here, but pal. Okay. It's all play. It's all play pretend. I love Western history, and so I'm doing a lot with Westerns. I'm doing a lot of screenwriting these days. I just wrote a adaptation of Olivia Harker's book, One for the Blackbird, One for the Crow, which has nothing to do with Mormonism, but it has to do with women on the frontier. So I definitely have interests outside of Mormonism, but I think I will always be attached to it because of what I do. And so as long as what I'm doing is useful, I will continue to do it. But I've stopped engaging in the community as much because it's a traumatized space, and traumatized people are dangerous until they work on their stuff. And so they will always lash out and be cruel and hurtful until they've healed that stuff. And so staying in there for very long is tricky. So I've mostly extricated myself from like the ex-Mormon community, not because I don't have such love for them, but because, you know, I'm an easy target, and I have to raise my kids and be a good person and like wake up in the morning. And being around the toxic part of Mormonism isn't going to do that for me.
If you drink a lot of soda, can you ever stop being a Mormon?
It's my vice, keeping me tethered to the telestial world forever.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't recommend it.
Oh, yeah, that mysticism stuff.
You're not into it.
Oh, I was so into it, but God, I figured at some point, I just decided I was going to die if I kept going down that path. That's what the magic mushrooms, they did too much to me.
I know.
Oh.
Well, it's good to have a little belief and be playful, but like I said, if you get orthodox or take things too seriously, it gets dangerous. No cults. Humans are wired to join a cult, and I think we just need to be more playful with stuff. Yeah. My rule with all of that stuff is it's play pretend. We have to have consent with others. We don't impose it on it. If someone starts revelating to me about even if it's like a tarot reading and they start trying to tell me tarot works because it uses archetypes that speak to the human consciousness. But if someone's trying to read my mind or future, I'm good. I'm good. But the utility, I think, is lovely, and the art is lovely, and the culture and the history is fascinating, and it did influence where we come from, and so all of that I find incredibly interesting.
Okay, well, do you want to tell people where to find you, and any last words you want to say?
Well, thanks for having me and for a very insightful conversation. It's been nice. I just wrote a book about Mormon history. A Ballad of Juanita Brooks, which you can order at Benchmark Books or Amazon.com, is coming out in December, about the Mountain Meadows Massacre.
So what's the name?
The Ballad of Juanita Brooks. So Juanita Brooks was a historian whose grandfather was one of the leaders involved in the massacre. And she was a faithful Mormon lady in St. George in the 1950s, just like this little school teacher housewife that uncovered this story and wrote the first big treatment of the history, exposing all of it.
Oh.
So it's about her and her story and what happened to her, which is pretty dramatic. So I wrote that book. I'm not on social media a lot, but I am on Facebook, Instagram, and I did a TikTok to promote my book. So I'm going to start doing that again. And then, you can find my work on Netflix, Hulu, FX. We got more stuff coming out. I have two podcasts. I have the Year of Polygamy, which is my old podcast, History of Mormon Polygamy. And now I do one called the Sunstone Mormon History Podcast with an incredibly brilliant historian, Brian Buchanan, who would, if you ever want to talk history, his recall is way better than mine. He wouldn't screw up the Orsons. It's called the Sunstone Mormon History Podcast. And come to Sunstone, end of July, sunstone.org. We have a big conference with all these nerds coming together, talking about this nerdy stuff. It's really fun.
Bunch of Mormons there, or?
All kinds.
Oh.
All kinds. We got like the culty tarot Mormons. We got the Mormon prophets. We got polygamists. We got ex-Mormons. We got the Mormons on mushrooms. We got
is there Mormons on mushrooms?
Oh yeah, I think that's their podcast. That's the name of their podcast. Oh, God. Yeah,
I'm terrified.
Yeah, well, you should be a little terrified. I mean, boundaries. Ex-Mormons, I get it. We don't need to go to the celestial kingdom with everything, right?
Okay.
Moderation in all things is a good Mormon thing that we should take with us for sure. Although I don't listen with my soda. So.
Don't go to the celestial kingdom with everything.
That's right.
Okay, I'm going to use some of this
please
information you've given me to destroy Mormons in my future arguments. Even though I've given them the sword of Laban. I know, it's crazy. I will not tell them I got the information from you, okay?
They wouldn't trust it if you did.
Okay. I'll give them some really good sources.
That's right. Give them Richard Bushman and you'll be just fine.
Okay. Perfect. Well, thanks everybody for watching. Like and subscribe. Go find her book on Amazon and follow her on social media. We'll see you guys next time. Peace out.